Hey everyone, tonight we are stepping back into a world that feels more like a fever dream of discipline than a functioning society. Imagine you are standing on a dusty plain in the Peloponnese, the air smelling of wild thyme and sweat, watching a group of children who haven't eaten a full meal in 3 weeks. You're about to witness the most extreme parenting style in human history, the kind that makes modern tiger moms look like soft pillows. We are talking about the Spartan Agoge, specifically how the mothers of Sparta intentionally used childhood starvation as a tool to forge the most terrifying infantry the world has ever seen. Now, let's be real for a second. You probably wouldn't survive this. Most of us get hangry if the DoorDash is 10 minutes late. These kids were expected to execute a tactical ambush on a goat after 4 days of fasting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I love seeing how far these stories travel. So go ahead and post your location and your local time in the comments. It's always cool to see who's awake in the middle of the night with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are 7 years old. In any other Greek city-state, this is the age where you might start learning your letters or playing with a hoop in the courtyard. But you aren't in Athens or Corinth. You are in Sparta, and the sun is rising over Mount Taygetus, casting long, sharp shadows over the home you are about to leave forever. You feel a hand on your shoulder. It isn't the gentle, lingering touch of a mother saying goodbye. It is the firm, steady grip of a woman who views you less as a son and more as a biological contribution to the state's phalanx. Spartan women were famously literate and physically fit, often competing in their own athletic trials, but their primary career was the production of warriors. To her, a soft son is a personal failure. You look up at her, perhaps hoping for a tear or a final embrace, but her face is a mask of bronze. She has spent the last 7 years toughening you up, refusing to use swaddling clothes, so your limbs could grow free and strong, and ignoring your crying fits to ensure you wouldn't grow up fearful of the dark or solitude. This is a mainstream historical fact that often gets glossed over. The Agoge did unstart at age 7. The preparation began in the cradle. Your mother was your first drill sergeant. She hands you over to the patanomos, the state official in charge of education. And as you are led away toward the barracks, you realize the safety of the hearth is gone. The Agoge's first breath is cold. You are stripped of your soft tunics and given a single coarse cloak to last you the entire year. But the most immediate change is the sensation in your stomach. The state intentionally provides scant rations. This is UNT because Sparta was poor. They had plenty of land and a massive population of enslaved helots to farm it. No, the starvation was a deliberate pedagogical tool. The goal was to make you more serviceable in times of crisis, and interestingly enough, the Spartans believed that a lean body would grow taller than one weighed down by too much food. Historians still argue whether this caloric restriction actually led to stunted growth or if the physical demand of their lifestyle balanced it out. But the theory at the time was that a hungry boy becomes a stretched boy. You find yourself huddled in a group of other boys, your agili or herds. The hunger begins as a dull ache, then transitions into a sharp, gnawing presence that dictates every thought. You aren't just hungry, you are being taught to be a predator. If you want to eat, you have to look at the world differently. You start eyeing the communal kitchens, the private gardens of the elite, and even the sacred offerings at the temples. You are being encouraged to steal. This is the quirky fringe reality of Spartan life. Theft was legal, even encouraged, but the punishment for getting caught was a brutal public flogging. Why? Because if you got caught, you were a bad thief, and a bad thief makes for a noisy scout on the battlefield. You spend your first nights on the cold ground, listening to the rhythmic breathing of 20 other starving boys. Every time your stomach growls, it's a reminder of what your mother told you before you left. Sparta does not need mouths to feed. She needs shields to protect her. You start to realize that the deprivation isn't a lack of the ultimate form of it. By starving you, they are giving you the gift of resourcefulness. You learn to move through the shadows of the city without making a sound, your bare feet clicking softly on the stones. You learn which plants are edible and which will make you sick. You learn to watch the older boys, the arenas, who act as your immediate superiors and often steal the lion's share of the meager broth provided. There's a strange irony in your situation. While you are being starved, you are also being watched for signs of grace. The Spartans had an obsession with the aesthetics of the warrior. They didn't want bloated, heavy men. They wanted wiry, supple soldiers. You feel your baby fat melting away, replaced by the hard, corded muscle of a stray dog. Your senses seem to sharpen. When you haven't eaten for 2 days, the smell of roasting meat from a distant villa doesn't just make you hungry, it gives you a physical map of the city. You can track that scent, calculate the wind direction, and weigh the risk of the lashes against the reward of a scrap of pork. You are learning the first lesson of the Agoge: the body is a lie. Your stomach tells you that you are dying, but your instructors tell you that you are just beginning to live. You see a boy from your herd get caught trying to snatch a loaf of bread from a vendor. He is dragged to the center of the square and whipped until the red tracks on his back match the sunset. He doesn't make a sound. If he cried out, he would be shamed by his own family. You think of your mother, probably sitting at home, perhaps wondering if you've eaten, but more likely hoping you've successfully robbed someone. It's a bizarre, inverted reality where a mother's pride is rooted in her son's ability to survive like a wolf. The darkness of the barracks is your new home. There is no pillow, no warmth, and no certainty of a breakfast. You wrap your single cloak tighter around your shivering frame. This is the first breath, the moment you realize that the world is a place of scarcity and that only the disciplined deserve to survive it. You are no longer a child. You are a project of the state, a piece of living iron being thrust into the forge. As you drift into a fitful, hungry sleep, the image of your mother's stern face flickers in your mind. She didn't throw you away. She threw you into the fire to see if you would melt or harden. And as the hunger pangs twist in your gut, you decide, right then and there, that you will be the iron. The hunger isn't a guest anymore. It's a permanent resident. As you move into the next phase of your training, the gnawing in your belly transitions from a sharp pain to a low, vibrating hum that colors every waking thought. You are entering the stage where the state shifts from merely providing scant rations to actively forcing you into the mindset of the cryptiotha, the secret police, or the hidden ones. While the full cryptia is usually reserved for the older, more elite youths, the spirit of it begins now. You aren't just a student in a classroom. You are a ghost in the making. You find yourself looking at the landscape not for its beauty, but for its tactical utility. That thicket of oleander isn't a splash of color. It's a place to hide while you wait for a helot to pass by with a basket of grain. In Sparta, the cryptia served a dual purpose. It was a rite of passage and a brutal mechanism of state security. Historians still argue whether the cryptia was a formal part of the Agoge curriculum for all boys, or a specialized unit for the most promising killers. But for you, the distinction doesn't matter. The philosophy is the same. You are being trained to be invisible and lethal. Because the state refuses to feed you sufficiently, you are forced to hunt. But this isn't a noble hunt with spears and hounds for the glory of the chase. This is a desperate, silent hunt for survival. You learn the patrol routes of the guards and the sleeping patterns of the farmers. You become a student of the night, learning that the moon is often a more dangerous enemy than a hungry wolf because it reveals your silhouette against the limestone cliffs. One of the quirkier, more unsettling facts about this period of your life is the Spartan obsession with the look of a hungry boy. Every 10 days, the Ephrase high-ranking overseers of the state inspect you and your peers in the nude. They aren't looking for wounds or illness, they are looking for fat. If you look too whelped, too soft, or too comfortable, you are publicly beaten. In their eyes, a fat boy is a lazy boy, a boy who has failed to be sufficiently hungry or sufficiently cunning. It's a bizarre biological standard. You are expected to be strong enough to fight, yet lean enough that your ribs create a ladder under your skin. You realize that your mother's lack of sympathy during your early years was a mercy. She was preparing you for the E4's cold, judgmental eyes. You spend your afternoons engaged in mock battles that are anything but pretend. These are often staged when the boys are at their weakest, specifically to see who retains their technical skill when their blood sugar is plummeting. You find that hunger does something strange to your perception. Your vision narrows, focusing entirely on the movement of the boy in front of you. You don't hear the wind or the distant lowing of cattle. You only hear the scrape of a wooden practice sword and the heavy, ragged breathing of your herd. You learn that a full stomach makes a man slow and content, but an empty one makes him sharp, desperate, and remarkably efficient. You start to appreciate the efficiency of the strike. You do UNT waste energy on a flourish. When you do UNT, know where your next calorie is coming from. There's a legendary fringe tidbit, often whispered among the barracks. The Spartans believed that hunger actually improved your night vision, while modern science might suggest that vitamin A deficiency from a poor diet would do the exact opposite. The psychological effect was real. Because you are so focused on the environment, you begin to see with your other senses. You feel the change in air pressure when someone moves behind you. You smell the dampness of the earth where a spring might be hidden. This is the cryptia of the soul, the moment when you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start becoming the master of them. You aren't starving anymore. You are fasting for war. You remember a time, perhaps only a year ago, when you would have cried if you missed a meal. Now, you watch a younger boy sob because he stepped on a thorn, and you feel nothing but a cold, distant irritation. The Agoge is stripping away your empathy, layer by layer, replacing it with a collective identity. You are not an individual who is hungry. You are a part of a unit that is being hardened. The older boys, the Arenas, encourage this by leading you on night raids. These aren't just for food. They are tests of loyalty. If one boy is caught, the entire group is punished. This builds a bond forged in shared suffering and shared criminality. You learn to lie for each other with the same stone-faced stoicism your mother showed you. The relationship between the Spartan mother and this ritual of starvation is complex. She isn't there to see your ribs, but she hears the reports. In Spartan society, a woman's reputation was directly tied to the performance of her sons in the Agoge. If you were caught stealing and shamed, she would be the first to turn her back on you. There are stories of Spartan mothers who, upon hearing their sons were unfit or cowardly, would publicly disown them, or worse. This knowledge sits in your stomach alongside the emptiness. You aren't just surviving for yourself. You are surviving to maintain the honor of a woman who would rather see you dead than mediocre. It's a heavy burden for a child, but in the silence of the Peloponnesian night, you realize that this burden is what keeps you upright. As you crouch in the tall grass outside a Helot storehouse, your heart hammering against your thin chest, you realize that the Agoge has turned the world into a game of shadows. You aren't a child anymore. You are a predator in training. The starvation isn't a punishment, it's a tactical advantage. A man who can go 3 days without food is a man who can outlast any siege, any march, and any enemy. You reach out and snatch a handful of raw grain, the husks scratching your throat as you swallow them whole without chewing. It's bitter and dry, but to you, it tastes like victory. You fade back into the tree line, a ghost among the oaks. Moving toward the barracks before the first light of dawn can betray your position. You have survived another day of the cryptia, and the hunger, while still there, feels like power. The hunger is no longer a localized pang in your stomach. It has become a structural part of your identity, much like the bronze of a shield. You find yourself reflecting on the last time you saw your mother, a memory that plays on a loop when the night chill gets too deep to ignore. In the rest of Greece, a mother might tuck a sweet cake into her son's tunic or offer a tearful prayer to Hestia for his safety, not your mother. You remember the weight of the heavy hoplite shield she held out to Euthospis. It was nearly as tall as you were back then, a massive disc of wood and bronze that felt like a millstone. She didn't offer a hug or a soft word. She looked you in the eye with a gaze that could pierce armor and uttered the phrase every Spartan boy carries like a scar. With it or on it. This wasn't just a catchy slogan for a pottery vase, it was a legal and social contract. To return with it meant you stood your ground in the phalanx. To return on it meant you were carried home dead, a hero. To return without it meant you had dropped your heavy shield to run away, though, ultimate act of a trembler. As you sit in the dirt of the Agoge, picking at a callus on your foot, you realize that your mother's stoicism was the blueprint for your starvation. She wasn't being cruel, she was being a Spartan. If she could be cold enough to contemplate your death with such practical detachment, you can certainly be cold enough to endure another night without a meal. Historians still argue whether this legendary maternal coldness was a universal reality or a bit of Lacedaemonian propaganda designed to intimidate their enemies. But as you feel your hip bones jutting out, the reality feels plenty real to you. The ritual of the shield and the ritual of the empty belly are two sides of the same iron coin. Your mother knew that a boy who is pampered at home will never find the strength to hold a 20-pound shield for 6 hours in the summer sun. By denying you comfort from the beginning, She was building a reservoir of resilience. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about Spartan mothers that often gets lost in the warrior talk. They were known for being the only women in Greece who could rule their men, supposedly because they were the only ones who gave birth to real men. This social power came from their role as the primary gatekeepers of Spartan discipline. If you were caught complaining about the starvation rituals, it would not be the pedant homos you. D fear most it would be the look of disgusted disappointment on your mother's face during the next public festival. You are learning that the shield is not just a tool for defense, it is a symbol of your debt to the city and your family. In the Agoge, your hunger serves a similar purpose. It is a debt you pay to become something more than a mere human. You see your peers differently now. You aren't just boys playing at war. You are a pack. When one of you manages to steal a wedge of cheese from a distracted merchant, it isn't shared out of a sense of kindness. It's shared because a stronger pack survives better. You remember your mother's Hanskelist from her own training in the gymnasium, and you realize she was the one who first taught you that the body is a weapon that must be tempered. She probably knew exactly how many calories were in the meager broth the state provided and calculated that it was just enough to keep your heart beating, but not enough to make you feel safe. There's a peculiar psychological edge to this maternal oversight. Even though she isn't physically present in the barracks, her voice is the one you hear when you contemplate giving up. In Spartan culture, the domestic sphere and the military sphere weren't separate. They were a feedback loop. Your mother's refusal to indulge your childhood whims was a deliberate preparation for the fact that on the battlefield, the universe doesn't care about your whims either. You start to find a twisted sort of pride in your hollow cheeks. You look at the soft boys from other cities, the visitors who occasionally come to Sparta on diplomatic missions, and you feel a surge of superiority. They look like overfed cattle to you. They are slow, their skin is too clear, and their eyes lack the frantic, piercing intelligence of a creature that has to hunt to survive. You recall a story she told you once about a Spartan woman who had 5 sons killed in a single battle. When a messenger told her the news, she didn't ask how they died or weep for their loss. She asked if Sparta had one. When the messenger said yes, she simply walked away satisfied. At 7, you thought that story was scary. At 10, with your ribs showing and your stomach cramped into a tight knot, you realize it was a set of instructions. You are being trained to be expendable for the sake of the whole. Your hunger is the first lesson in that expendability. If you can't even sacrifice a meal for the state, how could you ever sacrifice your life? The training today was particularly brutal. You were forced to run up the slopes of the mountains, carrying stones, while the instructors shouted about the weakness of the belly. You felt your head spinning, the world turning into a blur of gray rock and green scrub. But then, you remembered the shield. You imagined your mother standing at the top of the ridge, holding that bronze disc, waiting to see if you would reach her or collapse. That mental image, that maternal phantom is what kept your legs moving when your muscles were screaming for glucose. You aren't just running for Sparta. You are running to prove that her investment in you wasn't a waste of her time. As the sun sets, casting a blood-red light over the valley, you settle back into the barracks. You didn't manage to steal anything today. Your dinner was a handful of bitter acorns you found near a stream and a cup of water that tasted of silt. It's not enough. It's never enough. But as you lie down on your bed of reeds, you feel a strange sense of clarity. The hunger has stripped away the noise of childhood. You don't dream of toys or sweets anymore. You dream of the phalanx, the rhythmic clashing of bronze, and the moment you can finally stand before your mother with your shield held high. You are becoming the Iron Son, she demanded. The starvation isn't a wall, it's a bridge. And though the bridge is narrow and the drop is long, you realize you are already halfway across. The pangs in your midsection have evolved into a sharp intellectual challenge. You are no longer just a victim of hunger. You are a practitioner of the art of the stealthy thief. In the Agoge, the instructors and, by extension, the state have moved past merely depriving you of food to actively incentivizing you to break the law. You are given just enough food to keep you from fainting, but not enough to feel the sensation of fullness. This is a deliberate starvation ritual designed to force your mind into a state of constant low-level tactical planning. To the Spartans, a soldier who can sneak into a kitchen is a soldier who can sneak past an enemy picket. If you can't navigate a local market to steal a string of sausages without being detected, how can you be trusted to navigate a Persian camp to slit the throat of a general? Historians still argue whether this state-sanctioned theft was a way to maintain a predatory edge over the massive Helot population, or if it was simply a brutal method of ensuring only the most resourceful survived to adulthood. Either way, the rules are terrifyingly simple. You are encouraged to steal, but you are forbidden from being caught. In the world of the Agoge, getting caught is not a moral failing, it is a technical one. If a merchant grabs you by the scruff of the neck as you making off with a wheel of goat cheese, your punishment won't be for the theft itself. You will be whipped for your clumsiness and your lack of situational awareness. You are being taught that in the theater of war, the only true sin is incompetence. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these thievery sessions that paints a vivid picture of Spartan life. The boys were often encouraged to steal the extra food they needed from the communal mess halls of the adult men, the Secessia. Imagine the audacity required for a 10-year-old ribs sticking out and trembling from the cold to infiltrate a room full of the world's most elite warriors to snatch a piece of bread. It's a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek where the seekers are literal killing machines. This created a unique social dynamic where the elders were simultaneously your mentors and your marks. They watched you with the eyes of hawks, half hoping you'd succeed because it meant the next generation was sharp, and half hoping to catch you so they could uphold the discipline of the lash. You find yourself crouched behind a stone wall as the sun dips below the horizon. Your target is a small farm on the outskirts of the city. You've been watching the farmer's movements for 3 days, noting exactly when he goes to the well and how long he stays there. Your stomach is a tight, angry knot, but you use that pain to stay focused. You move with a fox-like gait, staying low to the ground, stepping only on the balls of your feet to avoid snapping any dry twigs. This is where your mother's training comes back to you. Remember when she used to make you walk across the tiled floor of your home in total silence? You thought it was a game then. Now, it's the difference between a meal and a bloody back. The sensation of the theft is an adrenaline rush that briefly masks the hunger. When your fingers finally close around a warm egg or a bundle of dried figs, your heart hammers against your chest like a trapped bird. You don't eat it immediately. That would be a rookie mistake. You have to retreat back into the shadows, back to a safe house or a hidden spot in the reeds, to consume your prize in total silence. You've seen boys get so desperate they eat their stolen goods while still in the target's sight, only to be caught because they were distracted by the first bite. You are learning the hardest lesson of all. Discipline must even govern your desperation. There's a dark, subtle humor to your situation that you share with your herd. You joke in hushed, laconic tones about how the local bakers must be the most vigilant men in Greece. You call the marks on your backs the map of our education. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words. Well, you might say that a Spartan diet is the only one in history where the cheat meal involves a literal crime and the fitness coach is a man with a whip. Or perhaps that the only thing thinner than your soup is the patience of the people you robbing. You realize that your life has become a series of tactical acquisitions, and you start to view the entire world as a pantry that just happens to be locked. This period of the Agoge is also where you learn the value of the laconic response. Hunger doesn't just sharpen your feet, it sharpens your tongue. You don't waste breath on long sentences. When your instructor asks if you are hungry, you don't complain. You simply look him in the eye and say nothing, or perhaps a single word, hungry. This brevity is a hallmark of Spartan culture, born from a life where energy is a finite resource. Every word spoken is a calorie burned. By keeping you in a state of childhood starvation, the state is effectively editing your personality, trimming away the fat of unnecessary emotion and excessive speech until only the lean, hard truth remains. As you return to the barracks, your stomach slightly less empty, but your mind more alert than ever. You realize that you aren't a child anymore. You are a shadow with a name. The art of the stealthy thief has taught you more about the terrain of your homeland than any map ever could. You know which stones are loose, which dogs bark at the moon, and which shadows are deep enough to swallow a boy whole. You lie down on your bed of reeds, the taste of the stolen egg still lingering on your tongue, and you feel a cold sense of accomplishment. You are outsmarting the world just to survive it. This is the discipline of the void, the realization that when you have nothing, you must become everything. You are a Spartan, and tonight, the fox didn't catch you. The hunger has moved into your bones now, But tonight, the physical vacuum in your stomach is eclipsed by a different kind of dread. You are being marched toward the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. This isn't a place of quiet prayer or soft hymns. It is a place of blood and limestone, where the starvation rituals meet their most violent public expression. You've heard the whispers since you were a toddler. The sanctuary is home to a ritual that even the most battle-hardened Greeks find unsettling. It is here that the endurance UVE built through months of deprivation is put to the ultimate test before the eyes of the entire city, including the women. And quite possibly, your own mother. The ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia is a centerpiece of Spartan education. Traditionally, it involved a game where cheeses were placed upon the altar, and you, the starving youths of the Agoge, were tasked with snatching them. The catch: a phalanx of older youths stood guard with heavy whips, tasked with lashing anyone who dared to reach for the food. Historians still argue whether this started as a simple test of speed or if it evolved over centuries into the diamastagosis, a grueling endurance contest where boys were whipped until they bled, or in some extreme cases, died, just to prove they could withstand the pain without a whimper. For you, the motive is simpler. That cheese represents the first real food you've seen in days, and the price of it is your own skin. As you stand in the queue, the air is thick with the smell of iron and ancient dust. You look at the altar and realize that the starvation was the pregame. The instructors didn't keep you hungry just to be mean. They kept you hungry so that the desire for that cheese would outweigh your fear of the lash. Hunger is the greatest motivator in the Spartan toolkit. If you were wealthed, you might look at those whips and decide the cheese isn't worth it. But when your stomach is a hollow cavern, you are willing to walk through a storm of leather and cord for a single bite of protein. You see a boy ahead of you dash forward. The whips crack like pistol shots, and red ribbons appear across his shoulders instantly. He grabs a wheel of cheese and retreats, his face a mask of silent, agonizing triumph. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about this sanctuary that modern visitors often miss. Archaeologists found thousands of small lead figurines and grotesque clay masks buried at the site. Some scholars suggest these masks were worn by the boys, or the mockers, to represent the wildness of the transition from childhood to warriorhood. You feel like you're wearing a mask even without the clay. Your face has become a fixed stare, your emotions buried under layers of callus. You might say that the Spartans invented the no pain, no gain mantra, but they forgot to mention that the gain is usually just more pain and a very small snack. It's the kind of gym culture where the pre-workout is a handful of dirt and the post-workout is a trip to the healer. You step forward, the sun is hot on your bare, scarred back, the cheese sits on the stone, white and mocking. You don't think about the pain you can't afford to, you think about the discipline of silence your mother instilled in you. You remember her telling you that a Spartan-esque voice should only be heard in the war paean, or the laconic retort. As you bolt toward the altar, the first lash catches you across the ribs. It feels like a line of liquid fire. You don't scream. To scream would be to fail your lineage. You snatch the cheese, your fingers slick with the sweat of the boy who went before you, and you take the second and third hits as you scramble back. The crowd is silent, watching with a clinical, terrifying intensity. This is the peak of the battlefield discipline training. In the chaos of a real fight, you will be hungry, you will be bleeding, and you will be exhausted. The altar of Artemis Orthia teaches you that the mind can be partitioned. One part of your brain handles the pain, another handles the objective, and the two never have to meet. You stand back in the line, clutching your prize, the blood cooling on your back and sticking to your single cloak. You realize that the hunger has made you a creature of the objective. You aren't a boy anymore. You are a heat-seeking missile designed to find the target regardless of the obstacles. There is a dark irony in the fact that this ritual was performed in front of the mothers of Sparta. They sat in the stands watching their sons being flayed for a piece of dairy. If a mother saw her son flinch, the social consequences were devastating. You'd be better off not coming home at all than coming home as the boy who cried at the altar. This public display ensured that the starvation rituals were just a private struggle between you and your barracks mates. They were a civic duty. You are being socialized into a culture that views physical suffering as a currency. The more you can pay, the more Spartan you are. As you chew the Cheez-Its, salty, hard, and tastes better than anything you've even ever eaten in your life, You look at the older men nodding in approval. You've passed a major threshold. You've shown that your hunger can be weaponized. You didn't just steal today, you endured. The ritual of the altar has linked your childhood deprivation to your future as a hoplite. You realize that when you are eventually standing in the shield wall at Thermopylae or Plataea, the sting of a Persian arrow will just be a reminder of the whips of Orthia. You are being emptied of humanity so you can be filled with the state. As the ritual ends and the dust settles, you feel a strange, hollow peace. You have bled for your bread, and in Sparta, that is the only way it's supposed to be. The cheese from the altar is long gone, its memory a fading ghost on your palate, and you are back to the reality of the mess hall. You are entering the age where you are permitted to sit on the periphery of the Sysatia, the communal gathering of the men, but you aren't there to feast. You are there to learn, and more specifically, to eat the broth of blood and vinegar. This is the infamous Spartan black soup, or melas zomos. It is a dish that has become a punchline in the ancient world. Yet for you, it is the fundamental fuel of the Lacedaemonian machine. To look into the bowl is to look into the soul of your city. It is dark, uninviting, and utterly devoid of luxury. The recipe is deceptively simple. Boiled pig's legs, blood, salt, and vinegar. Historians still argue whether the vinegar was added as a preservative or simply to act as a chemical agent to keep the blood from clotting into unpalatable chunks. Regardless of the chemistry, the result was a meal that was notoriously difficult for outsiders to stomach. There is a famous quirky tidbit about a traveler from Sybaris, a city known for its extreme luxury, who tasted the black soup and remarked, "Now I know why the Spartans do not fear death. To die is 1,000 times preferable to eating this." You hear this story and you don't laugh. To you, the soup is a symbol of your transition. If you can learn to crave this bitter metallic sludge, then there is nothing the world can withhold from you that will break your spirit. This is the next level of the starvation rituals. The state isn't just giving you little food, it is giving you food that provides no sensory joy. By stripping away the pleasure of eating, the Spartan mothers and the state worked together to ensure that you would never be a slave to your belly. In other Greek cities, men spent fortunes on exotic spices, honeyed wines, and tender meats. In Sparta, such things were viewed as a form of internal rot. If you can be satisfied by a bowl of blood and vinegar, you are a man who can march 50 miles on a handful of grain. You are becoming a biological engine that runs on the lowest grade of fuel possible. The black soup ritual also serves a social purpose. You watch the elders consume their portion with a grim, rhythmic efficiency. There is no talk of the weather or trivial gossip. The conversation is laconic, short, sharp observations about bravery, the state, and the upcoming maneuvers. You realize that your mother's refusal to give you sweets when you were a toddler was the first step toward this bowl. She was weeding out your addict tendencies, the desire for comfort and variety, before they could take root. You might say that the Spartan diet is the original keto plan, except instead of losing weight for a beach body, you're losing your soul for the phalanx. It's the kind of meal where the chef's kiss is actually just a punch to the throat. There is a fringe theory among some scholars that the black soup was actually quite nutritious, packed with iron and protein, providing the exact building blocks needed for bone density and muscle repair in a growing warrior. While that might be true, the psychological impact was the real goal. You are being taught that food is a necessary evil, a maintenance task rather than a highlight of the day. You find that because the soup is so unappealing, you eat it quickly. You don't linger over the bowl. You finish, you stand, and you return to your drills. This efficiency of consumption is a battlefield discipline in itself. In a campaign, the army that can eat, pack, and move in 20 minutes has a massive advantage over the army that needs to roast a lamb and sit for a banquet. You remember a time when you saw a merchant bringing a basket of dried figs and honey cakes into the city? The smell was so sweet, it made your head spin. A sharp contrast to the iron-heavy scent of the soup. You felt a momentary surge of resentment, a desire to reach out and grab a handful of that gold-hued sweetness. But then you looked at your herd brothers. You saw the same look in their eyes, and then you saw them turn away, back to their practice spears. To indulge in the sweetness would be to admit a weakness. It would be to say that you are still a child who needs to be comforted. You take another sip of the vinegar-heavy broth, and the acidity burns away the desire for the figs. Your mother once told you that hunger is the best sauce. At the time, You thought it was just something parents said to get kids to finish their lentils. Now, you understand it as a tactical reality. When you are truly, deeply hungry, the kind of hunger that comes from weeks of scant rations and blood soup, every calorie is a victory. You aren't eating for taste. You are eating for the ability to hold your shield for one more hour. This is the discipline of the gut. You are learning to separate the physical sensation of eating from the emotional expectation of pleasure. As the sun sets and the communal fires are extinguished, the taste of salt and blood lingers in your mouth. You feel a strange sense of superiority over the rest of the world. You are fueled by the stuff of life itself, stripped of all the fluff that makes other men soft. The broth of blood and vinegar has become your elixir. It isn't good, it isn't kind, and it certainly isn't pretty, but then again, neither are you. You are a Spartan in training, and you have learned to find your strength in the very things that would make lesser men gag. You are ready for the next hardship, your stomach settled into a cold, efficient silence. The starvation ritual doesn't end with what you put in your body, it extends to where you rest it. After your evening dose of the metallic black soup, there is no soft mattress or warm wool blanket waiting for you. In fact, the state has decided that even the act of sleeping should be a trial of resourcefulness and physical grit. You are marched down to the banks of the Eurotas River, where the water runs cold and the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and greenery. Here you are tasked with creating your own bed. This isn't a craft project. It's a survival exercise known as the hardened bed of reeds. To build your mattress, you must harvest the sharp, thick river reeds, known as lichnis. But there is a catch, a very Spartan catch. You are forbidden from using a knife or any metal tool. You must pull, snap, and tear these reeds with your bare hands. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer physical toll of the Agoge. By the time you've gathered enough to form a pile, your palms are crisscrossed with tiny, stinging slices from the fibrous stalks, and your fingernails are caked with river mud. The instructors watch closely, ensuring no one cheats by using a tool. They want your hands to be as calloused as your soul. The hunger in your belly makes the physical labor feel twice as heavy, every tug at a stubborn reed sending a wave of dizziness through your mind. Historians still argue whether this specific ritual was meant to toughen the skin of the hands, for a better grip on a spear, or if it was purely silicula. What you know is that the result is a bed that feels more like a pile of toothpicks than a place of rest. In the winter months, you are allowed to mix in thistledown with the reeds, a quirky fringe tidbit that sounds almost comfortable until you realize that even thistledown is scratchy and does little to stop the dampness of the ground from seeping into your bones. It's the kind of luxury that only a Spartan could appreciate, like getting a slightly softer rock to use as a pillow. You lie down, the sharp ends of the reeds poking through your single thin cloak. Every time you shift, the bed crunches and stabs. You are learning that comfort is a luxury that breeds effeminacy, a word the Spartan instructors use as the ultimate insult. You think about the soft boys in Athens who probably sleep on linen sheets stuffed with feathers. To the Spartan mind, that boy is already defeated. If he loses his bed, he loses his spirit. But you can sleep anywhere. You can sleep in a ditch, on a mountain pass, or in the middle of a muddy field, because you have been trained to find rest in the absence of comfort. You might say that the Spartan sleep hygiene routine is basically just be too exhausted to care that you being poked by a stick. It's the original weighted blanket, except the weight is just the crushing reality of your life. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan's idea of firm support for his back involves actual vegetation and the constant threat of a snakebite. Or perhaps that the only thing organic about your lifestyle is the fact that your bed is currently trying to photosynthesize. You realize that your mother's refusal to use swaddling clothes on you as an infant was the direct precursor to this. She wanted your limbs to be free, but more importantly, she wanted you to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. By the time you were 3, you were probably sleeping on a wooden bench. At 7, the reeds feel like a natural progression. This ritual of the reeds also reinforces the starvation of the senses. When you are deprived of warmth and softness, your mind stops seeking them. You become a creature of pure utility. You find that the cold from the river helps dull the ache in your stomach, a strange physiological trade-off. The hunger makes you lightheaded, and the cold keeps you from falling into a truly deep, vulnerable sleep. You stay in a state of battlefield readiness even in your dreams. You are learning to listen to the environment, the rustle of the wind through the Eurotas Valley, the distant howl of a wolf, the footsteps of a sentry. You are never truly off duty. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding the hardened bed. Historians still argue whether this ritualized sleep deprivation contributed to the legendary Spartan short-fist temperament, or if it simply created a state of permanent hypervigilance. Looking at the hollowed-out faces of your peers in the moonlight, it's probably both. You see a boy near you shivering so violently that his reeds are rattling, but he doesn't move to find a warmer spot. To move would be to admit the cold has power over him. You stay still, forcing your muscles to relax against the sharp stalks, turning the pain into a background noise that you can eventually ignore. As the moon hangs high over the Peloponnese, you realize that the hardened bed is just another wall in the fortress they are building inside you. Between the starvation, the black soup, and the reeds, there is no room left for the self. You are being compressed into a diamond of discipline. You aren't a child who needs a mother to tuck him in. You are a weapon being stored for the night. The sharp sting of a reed against your neck is just a reminder that you are alive and that you are hard. You close your eyes, the hunger a dull throb in your core, and wait for the pre-dawn whistle that will start the cycle of suffering all over again. You have mastered the art of resting on a knife's edge. The sun has uneven cleared the peaks of the Parnan Range before you are back on your feet. The sharp imprint of the river reads still etched into your skin. But as you stand, you don't reach for a pair of sandals. In the Agoge, footwear is for the weak, and this is the next grueling chapter of your physical transformation. While the rest of the Greek world might wear leather crepita or sturdy boots for travel, the Spartan state mandates that you navigate the world entirely barefoot. This isn't a matter of poverty, it is a deliberate starvation of protection for your feet. The goal is to turn your soles into a natural armor, a biological evolution that ensures you can never be slowed down by a broken strap or a lost shoe. This is a mainstream historical fact. Spartan youths were forbidden from wearing shoes to render them more agile in climbing hills and more secure in descending steep slopes. You find this to be a terrifyingly literal truth. Your first few months without shoes were a nightmare of stone bruises, thorns, and the biting cold of the morning frost. But now, as you march, you realize something has shifted. Your feet have become wider, tougher, and less sensitive to the trivialities of the terrain. Historians still argue whether this constant barefoot training gave the Spartans a significant tactical advantage in the rocky, uneven theater of Greek warfare, where a slipped foot could mean the collapse of a phalanx. To you, it's not about tactics, it's about the fact that you can no longer feel the sharp edges of the limestone. The Spartan mothers were the silent architects of this leather sole philosophy. You remember watching your mother walk through the household, her own feet bare and steady. She never winced if she stepped on a stray pebble. By denying you shoes from the moment you entered the Agoge, the state is continuing her work of removing every possible layer of separation. Between you and the harsh reality of the earth, there is a quirky, fringe tidbit about Spartan foot culture. It was said that a veteran Spartan's feet were so tough they could strike a spark off a flint stone. While that's likely a bit of hyperbolic soldier humor, the underlying truth is that you are becoming a creature of the mountain. You might say that the Spartan pedicure involves a daily exfoliation via jagged marble and a moisturizing soak in river mud. It's the kind of barefoot running trend that doesn't come with a fancy blog or a $20 smoothie. You are currently being led on a forced march across the jagged Peloponnesian terrain. Your stomach is, as usual, a hollow pit, and the lack of calories makes every step feel like a mountain climb. You notice that your gait has changed. You no longer stomp with your heels. You land on the balls of your feet, testing the ground with a predator's caution. This is the discipline of the soul. Because you are barefoot, you are more connected to the world around you. You feel the temperature of the soil, the moisture of the grass, and the vibration of those marching beside you. You are learning to read the earth with your feet, as easily as a scholar reads a scroll. There is a light joke to be made about the Spartan shoe department tit, essentially just a room full of rocks and a sign that says, "Good luck," or perhaps that the only arch support you have is the actual stone arches of the city gates you re-marching under. You realize that your hunger and your bare feet are working in tandem. The starvation makes you light, and the lack of shoes makes you silent. Together, they turn you into a ghost. If you were wearing heavy leather boots, your stomach would feel even heavier, and your footsteps would announce your presence for miles. Now, you move with the quiet grace of a starving lynx, your feet gripping the rock with the certainty that no man-made sandal could ever provide. There is a dark psychological edge to this deprivation. By taking away your shoes, the state is making you permanently ready. A man with shoes has to put them on before he can fight. A man without them is born for the struggle. You see a boy trip on a particularly sharp piece of obsidian, a deep gash opening on his heel. He doesn't stop. He doesn't even look down. To show pain over a foot injury is to invite the shame of the elders. He keeps his place in the line, leaving a faint trail of red on the white stone. You realize that you are being taught to view your own body as a disposable tool. If the tool breaks, you use it until it falls apart. Your mother's voice echoes in your head. The earth is your floor and your weapon. She knew that a son who could run barefoot over thorns would never be slowed down by a long march to the frontier. In the world of the phalanx, the march is often more deadly than the battle. Armies collapse because of blisters in foot tread. But the Spartan army is a forest of bare feet, moving with a rhythmic, terrifying stability. You are learning that starving the feet of comfort is what allows the legs to carry the shield. This is the pedal discipline of the warrior state. As you reach the summit of the ridge, the wind whipping against your single cloak, you look down at your feet. They are stained with dust and blood, calloused and ugly, and they are the most reliable things you own. You didn't need a cobbler to make them. You only needed the will to keep walking. The ritual of the barefoot has transformed you. You are no longer a child who fears the sharp edges of the world. You are a man who has integrated the world's sharpness into his own body. You stand firm on the rock, your stomach growling in the thin air, and you feel a strange sense of grounded power. You are a Spartan, and you don't need shoes to walk over the neck of your enemies. The morning frost on your bare feet was merely the appetizer for the day. True lesson in endurance. As the winter winds howl down from the peaks of the Tagitus Mountains, you find yourself facing the single cloak philosophy. While the wealthy of Athens wrap themselves in layers of fine wool and heavy mantles, you are permitted exactly one phoenicus, a crimson cloak, to last you the entire year. This isn't just about color or tradition. It is a tactical starvation of warmth. Whether it is the blistering heat of the Peloponnesian July or the bone-chilling damp of a December dawn, that single piece of coarse fabric is your only shield against the elements. You are being taught that heat, like food, is a luxury that the body must learn to provide for itself through the internal fire of discipline. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer austerity of the Agoge. The state intentionally issued only one garment to harden the body against the changes of the seasons. Historians still argue whether this practice actually boosted the immune systems of the Spartan youths through a form of primitive cold shock therapy, or if it simply ensured that only the most biologically resilient survived to adulthood. To you, the debate is irrelevant as you shiver in the pre-dawn shadows. You've learned to wrap the cloak in specific ways to trap the heat of your breath, a survival skill born of necessity. The hunger in your gut makes the cold feel sharper as you have no fat reserves to act as insulation. You are a creature of skin, bone, and a single scrap of red wool. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these cloaks. They were dyed a deep, vibrant crimson specifically so that if you were wounded in battle, your enemies wouldn't see you bleed. It's the ultimate fake-it-till-you-make-it strategy applied to lethal combat. Even now, as a boy, that red fabric is a psychological anchor. You might say that Spartan fashion is incredibly easy to follow. There's only one item in the catalog. It only comes in blood red, and the summer collection is exactly the same as the winter collection. It's the original capsule wardrobe, curated by a committee of men who think shivering is a personality flaw. You realize that your mother's refusal to give you extra blankets at home was her way of ensuring you would unfeel the loss of them now. The single cloak philosophy forces a change in your behavior. When you are cold and hungry, you don't stand still. You move. You see your herd engaged in constant physical activity, wrestling, running, or performing rhythmic drills, not just because the instructors ordered it, but because movement is the only way to stay warm. You are learning to find warmth in your own discipline. The cold doesn't stop you, it drives you. You become more efficient in your movements, wasting no energy on frivolous gestures. Every jump and every strike of your practice spear is a way to generate the friction needed to keep your blood flowing. There's a light joke to be found in your misery. A Spartan's idea of layering for the winter is just putting on a grumpier expression. Or perhaps that the only thing breathable about your outfit is the fact that you recurrently hyperventilating to keep your core temperature up. You realize that the Agoge is a process of stripping. They took away your family, they took away your food, they took away your shoes, and now they've taken away the very idea of environmental comfort. What is left is a human being who is entirely self-contained. You don't need a house, you have your cloak. You don't need a fire, you have your heart rate. You are becoming an atmospheric predator, capable of functioning in conditions that would paralyze a civilized man. This period of the Agoge is also where you learn the social heat of the phalanx. At night, you and your brothers huddle together in the barracks on your beds of reeds. This isn't out of affection, but out of a cold, calculated need for survival. The herd becomes a single, warm organism. You learn the smell of your companions, the sound of their breathing, and the exact way to press against one another to share the meager heat trapped by 20 red cloaks. This is the foundation of the shield wall. You aren't just learning to fight together. You are learning to exist as a single biological unit. The starvation of warmth reinforces the need for the collective. Your mother's voice remains the iron in your spine. She told you that a Spartan woman would rather her son be cold than softened by the wool of a sheep. She viewed your shivering as the sound of your weakness leaving your body. In her eyes, if you needed a fire to be brave, your bravery was a lie. You start to find a perverse pride in the cold. When you see a traveler wrapped in a heavy furs, you feel a surge of contempt. He is a slave to his clothes. You are the master of your skin. You are learning that the single cloak is more than a garment. It is a declaration of independence from the physical world. As the sun finally rises, offering a pale, heatless light, you stand and shake the frost from your red cloak. Your stomach is empty, your feet are numb, and the wind is biting through your single layer of fabric, but you are upright. You have survived another night of the thermal ritual. You wrap the cloak around your shoulders, the rough wool scratching against your scarred skin, and prepare for the day's march. You are a Spartan, and you carry your own heat within you. The world can be as cold as it wants. It will never be colder than the resolve your mother planted in your chest. The sun hangs low over the Uradas Valley, casting long, hungry shadows across the training grounds. You are currently standing at the threshold of the mess hall shadows, a psychological torture disguised as a mealtime observation. While the adult warriors, the Spartiates, gather inside the Secessia for their communal dinner, you and your herd are forced to stand in the doorway, silent and watchful. You aren't there to eat. You are there to act as observers, servers, and, most cruelly, as targets for the elders' laconic wit. Your stomach is a screaming void, the smell of the black soup and roasted barley wafting toward you like a physical blow. This is a mainstream historical fact. Spartan youths were required to attend these communal meals specifically to learn from the conversation of the men and to witness the self-control of their superiors. Historians still argue whether this practice was intended to foster a sense of intergenerational brotherhood or if it was a deliberate form of psychological conditioning to ensure the youths remained in a permanent state of deferential hunger. To you, it feels like the latter. You stand with your hands behind your back, your single cloak draped over your protruding ribs, watching the men eat with a rhythmic, unhurried discipline. They don't gorge themselves. They eat only what is necessary, reinforcing the idea that food is fuel, not pleasure. But to a boy who hasn't had a solid meal in 48 hours, even that meager ration looks like a king's ransom. You are being taught to look at food without emotion, to observe the object of desire, and remain unmoved. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about these mess hall observations. The elders would sometimes force the helots to drink massive quantities of unmixed wine until they were dangerously intoxicated, then parade them before the boys. You watch these drunken men stumble, weep, and lose their dignity, while the elders point at them as a warning. This, they say, is what happens when a man loses control of his appetites. It is a brutal, effective lesson. By starving you and then showing you the shame of the belly, they are ensuring you associate excess with the slave class. You might say that the Spartan Dayer program was significantly more effective because it involved literal human props and a much higher chance of being hit with a sandal. It's the kind of educational field trip where the gift shop is just a lifelong memory of a traumatic event. You find yourself calculating, this is the shadow part of the ritual. As you move through the hall to clear plates or refill water skins, you are constantly looking for the gap. a piece of crust that fell near the bench, a bone with a sliver of marrow left, a stray olive. Your eyes move with a predator's precision, but your face remains a mask of stone. If you are caught scavenging, the punishment is swift and public. You are learning the tactics of the scrap. You've developed a way of palm-sweeping a piece of bread into your cloak in a single, fluid motion that would make a modern stage magician jealous. You don't eat it now, that would be suicide. You hold it against your skin, feeling the warmth of the bread through the wool. A secret victory in the heart of the enemy's camp. There's a light joke to be made here. Being a waiter in Sparta is the only job in history where the tip is not getting beaten and the employee meal is a handful of air. Or perhaps that the Spartan idea of dinner theater is just watching a drunk guy fall over while you try to steal a lentil. You realize that your mother's voice is the one telling you to stay sharp. She would be the first to call you a belly slave if she saw you begging for a scrap. This observation ritual turns the act of eating into a social hierarchy. The warriors eat, the youths watch, and the unfit are excluded. Your hunger is the price of admission to the future. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this visual starvation. Historians still argue whether this constant exposure to the food of the elders served to build a resentment that fueled battlefield aggression, or if it successfully sublimated the ego into the state collective. In your case, it's a sharpening of the senses. When you are standing in those shadows, you aren't a child, you are a data collector. You listen to the men discuss the merits of a deprived phalanx versus a wide one. You hear them recount the mistakes made in the last skirmish with Tegea. You are being fed with information because your body is being denied calories. The state is trading your physical comfort for intellectual and tactical indoctrination. As the meal concludes and the men stand to sing their war hymns, the peons, the air in the hall, vibrates with their voices. You feel the sound in your empty chest. It is a powerful, intoxicating feeling that briefly makes you forget your hunger. You are part of this. Even as a shadow in the doorway, you are a part of the Lacedaemonian identity. You realize that the starvation is what makes the hymn sound so sweet. If you were full and complacent, the music would just be noise. Because you are empty, you have room for the city's glory to fill you up. This is the sublimation of the void, the moment you realize that the state is the only thing that can truly satisfy your hunger. The elders depart, and you are marched back to your reeds. You reach into your cloak and find the piece of bread you acquired. It is small, dry, and tastes of the sweat of a warrior. You share it with the boy next to you, not out of kindness, but to ensure he remains strong enough to cover your flank tomorrow. You are learning that in the shadows of the mess hall, you aren't just learning how to steal, you are learning how to lead. You fall asleep with the taste of barley on your tongue and the songs of the phalanx ringing in your ears. The mess hall shadows finally fading into the darkness of the night. The hunger has reached a plateau. It's no longer an active scream, but a dull, heavy background radiation that defines the perimeter of your existence. You've become accustomed to the mess hall shadows, but today, the lesson shifts from the barracks to the political heart of the city. You are beginning to understand the link between maternal oversight and state policy. In Sparta, your mother isn't just a parent, she is a civic auditor. Her role in the starvation rituals wasn't born from a personal whim of cruelty, but from a deep-seated state mandate. She is the one who ensures that the transition from a mother-s boy to a state-s weapon is seamless. In any other Greek city, a mother might bribe a teacher to be easy on her son. In Sparta, she'd likely bribe the instructor to give you a heavier lash if you weren't looking lean enough. This is a mainstream historical fact that underscores the unique social structure of the Lacedaemonians. Women were the primary enforcers of the Spartan mirage. While the men were away in the barracks or on campaign, the women managed the estates and, more importantly, the reputation of their bloodlines. They were the ones who would publicly shame a family if a son was found to be soft or well-padded. Historians still argue whether this gave Spartan women a level of psychological power that surpassed their male counterparts, or if they were simply high-functioning gears in the state's military machine. For you, it means there is no safe harbor. You can't go home to escape the hunger, because home is where the standards were set in the first place. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about this maternal oversight that sounds almost like a dark comedy. It was reported that if a Spartan youth returned home for a brief visit and looked too healthy, his mother might physically beat him for betraying the Agoge. The logic was that if you were full, you were either stealing poorly, getting caught by the belly rather than the eye, or you were finding comfort elsewhere, and comfort is the enemy of the state. You might say that the Spartan parent-teacher association meetings were mostly just mothers checking the sharpness of their sons' collarbones and making sure that extracurriculars involved enough blood. It's the kind of helicopter parenting where the helicopter is armed with a bronze spear. You are standing in the public square, the Agora, during a civic inspection. You see your mother in the distance, standing with a group of other women. They aren't waving. They are watching the way you stand, the way you carry your single cloak, and the way your eyes move. You feel a surge of a very specific kind of fear, the fear of the maternal judgment. If you show signs of fatigue, if you lean against a wall to rest your calorie-depleted body, you aren't just failing the patanomos, you are failing her. You realize that the starvation rituals are a form of social currency. Every pound of flesh you lose is a bit of honor she gains in the eyes of the community. There's a light joke to be found in this social pressure. A Spartan mother's idea of a care package is an empty box with a note that says, "I hope you stole this box," or perhaps that the only positive reinforcement you get at home is when she does untell the neighbors that you a disappointment. You realize that your mother's love is entirely conditional on your utility to the phalanx. This is the state-family paradox. The family exists only to serve the state, and the mother is the primary recruiter. By starving you, she is proving her own loyalty to Lycurgus's laws. She is a stakeholder in your suffering. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this maternal role. Historians still argue whether Spartan mothers were truly as cold as the legends suggest, or if the shield speech rhetoric was a cultural performance meant to maintain social order. When you look at her, you don't see a performer. You see a woman who has sacrificed her own comfort to ensure her lineage survives in a city that eats the weak. You start to see her as a mirror. If she can be this hard, then you must be harder. The hunger in your stomach becomes a way to honor her. You aren't just not eating, you are maintaining the family brand. This realization changes your perspective on the Agoge. You aren't being punished by the state, you are being presented to the state by your mother. She is the one who handed you over, and she is the one who will judge the final product. This creates a psychological closed loop. There is no escape from the discipline because the two most powerful forces in your life, the state and the family, are saying the exact same thing. Be hungry, be silent, be lethal. You find that you no longer resent the lack of food. You resent the fact that you ever wanted it in the first place. You are purging the boy to make room for the hoplite. As the inspection ends and you are marched back to your herd, you catch her eye for a split second. She doesn't smile, but she gives a single sharp nod of her head. It's better than 1,000 hugs. It's the signal that you are still in the game. You return to the barracks, your stomach cramping with a fresh wave of hunger, but your spirit is oddly fortified. You realize that maternal oversight is the glue that holds the starvation rituals together. Without her judgment, the Agoge would just be a prison. With it, it's an apprenticeship. You lie down on your reeds, the cold air biting at your skin, and you feel the weight of her expectations like a warm blanket. You will not be the son who makes her hide her face in the Agora. You will be the one who brings home the shield door, is carried home upon it. The hunger has reached a point of spiritual clarity where your body no longer feels like yours. It feels like an instrument of the state. It is at this peak of deprivation that the elders tell you the story of the fox in the tunic. This isn't just a campfire tale, it is the ultimate parable of the Agoge, a psychological standard you are expected to reach. The legend tells of a Spartan youth who had successfully stolen a live fox cub from a nearby farm. While he was making his way back to the barracks, he was stopped by an instructor. To avoid detection, the boy shoved the fox under his tunic. As the man spoke to him at length, the terrified fox began to gnaw and claw into the boy's stomach, literally disemboweling him. The boy stood perfectly still, his face an unmoving mask of calm, until the fox had chewed through his vitals and the boy dropped dead still, having never admitted to the theft. This is a mainstream historical fact, not necessarily that the event occurred exactly as described, but that the story was the cornerstone of Spartan moral education. Historians still argue whether this was a literal account or a piece of extreme nationalistic mythology designed to terrify enemies with the idea of Spartan pain tolerance. For you, the literal truth doesn't matter. The expectation does. You're being taught that the starvation rituals are secondary to the ritual of silence. The theft was good, the hunger was necessary, but the ability to die rather than be exposed for a mistake is the pinnacle of virtue. If you cannot endure the fox of your own hunger without crying out, how can you be trusted with the secrets of the phalanx? There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about this story that paints a grim picture of your daily reality. Many scholars believe this story was specifically told to the Arenista older youths to remind them that their younger brothers were watching them. You are part of a culture where suffering in silence is the only respected form of communication. You might say that the Spartan version of "Don't let MCU sweat" is more like "Don't let MCU intestines" being chewed on by a woodland creature. It's a very specific kind of brand management. You realize that your mother's lack of sympathy for your childhood scrapes was her way of ensuring that if a fox ever started eating you, you wouldn't make her look bad by screaming. You find yourself in a situation that feels like a pale imitation of the legend. You've managed to snatch a live bird, a small, fluttering quail, from a trap. As you're hiding it beneath your cloak, an elder stops to question you about your spear work. Your stomach is cramping, and the bird is scratching your skin with its tiny claws. You feel the sharp sting of the talons, and for a second, panic flares. But then you remember the boy and the fox. You breathe slowly, controlling your heart rate. You answer the elder in short, clipped, laconic sentences. You feel a drop of blood trickle down your ribs, but you don't flinch. You are internalizing the legend. You are realizing that your skin is just a container, and your will is the only thing that is real. There's a light joke to be made here. Spartan pet ownership is really just a high-stakes game of will. This animal eat me before I eat it. Or perhaps that the Spartan idea of a stomachache is significantly more hardcore than anything a modern doctor has ever seen. You realize that the Agoge has turned your body into a silent partner. Your stomach can be empty, your feet can be bleeding, and your ribs can be scratched to pieces, but your face must remain as still as a statue of Leonidas. This is the aesthetics of the void, the belief that a true warrior is invisible even when he is standing right in front of you. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this legendary stoicism. Historians still argue whether this extreme suppression of the flight or fight response led to a unique form of collective PTSD, or if it created a level of focus that made the Spartans invincible in a standard engagement. In the moment, it doesn't feel like a debate. It feels like a transformation. When you finally release the bird in the safety of the woods and see the red marks on your skin, you don't feel pain. You feel a cold, terrifying sense of power. You have outlasted the fox. You have proven that your hunger is a secret you can keep. The fox in the tunic story is the final nail in the coffin of your childhood. It teaches you that the world can take everything from you. It can even eat you alive, but it cannot make you speak if you refuse. The starvation has prepared you for this by making your physical needs secondary to your mental objectives. You aren't starving anymore. You are unbreakable. The boy in the story didn't die because he was a thief. He died because he was a perfectionist. And in Sparta, perfection is the only passing grade. As you return to the barracks, the taste of the raw quail still metallic in your mouth, you look at your brothers. You wonder which of them has a fox under their tunic tonight. You don't ask, and they don't tell. You simply nod, a silent acknowledgement of the discipline of the gut. You lie down on your reeds, the memory of the legendary boy's sacrifice providing more warmth than your single cloak ever could. You are a Spartan, and you have learned the most important lesson of all. Silence is not just the absence of noise. It is the presence of total, absolute control over your own destruction. The hunger has reached its final, most sophisticated stage. It is no longer just a physical sensation or a test of theft. It has become psychological warfare of the belly. By now, you are a teenager, and the state has spent years proving to you that your body's signals are essentially suggestions that can be ignored. This is a deliberate, tactical conditioning. The Spartan instructors know that the biggest threat to a soldier's morale is unto the enemy's spear, but the enemy within the part of the mind that screams for comfort, safety, and bread. By keeping you in a state of permanent deprivation, they are effectively deprogramming the human instinct to be bribed or broken by physical need. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Spartan army was famous for its ability to operate in supply deprived environments where other Greek armies would have mutinied or melted away. Historians still argue whether this gave them a logistical advantage that outweighed their smaller numbers, as a Spartan unit required significantly less grain per day than an Athenian one. To you, this isn't about logistics, it's about sovereignty. You are being taught that the man who can control his hunger is a man who cannot be bought. In the ancient world, many a city fell because a hungry sentry was offered a bag of gold and a hot meal to open the gates. In Sparta, that sentry would look at the gold with indifference and the meal with suspicion. You have been starved into integrity. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about this psychological conditioning. The Spartans were notoriously they used heavy, cumbersome iron spits as currency instead of gold or silver coins, specifically because iron was hard to hide and even harder to use to buy luxuries. This meant that even if you wanted to buy a secret meal, you'd have to carry a literal pile of iron to the baker, making the transaction impossible to conceal. You might say that the Spartan credit card was basically just a very heavy, very obvious paperweight. It's the kind of financial system where the transaction fee is a hernia and the cashback bonus is just more iron. You realize that your mother's early lessons in scarcity were preparing you for a life where material wealth is a physical burden rather than a shortcut to satisfaction. You find that this warfare of the belly has changed your relationship with your enemies. When you look at the soldiers from other cities, you don't just see different armor, you see different gut discipline. You know that if you can draw a Corinthian army into a long, drawn-out chase through the mountains, their resolve will shatter the moment their supply wagons are delayed. You, however, are a predator who can wait. You've learned to hibernate while standing up to lower your metabolic output and sharpen your focus while your stomach is empty. This is the sublimation of the hunger. You've taken the energy most people spend on wanting things and redirected it into the single-minded pursuit of the state's objectives. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan's 5-star dining experience is just a 3-star view of a mountain and a 0-star bowl of dirt. Or perhaps that the only inflation in Sparta is the ego of the guy who went for days without a snack. You realize that the Agoge has turned your hunger into a weapon of war. While other men are motivated by the carrot, you have been trained to thrive under the stick. This makes you terrifyingly unpredictable to an opponent. They expect you to act like a human being with human needs, but you are acting like a biological machine that has been overclocked by deprivation. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this mental state. Historians still argue whether this perpetual starvation led to a state of collective hysteria that manifested as battlefield bravery, or if it was a calculated psychological flattening of the individual. Looking at your brothers, you see a bit of both. There is a wildness in the eyes of a starving Spartan, a wolf stare, that comes from the constant low-level pressure on the nervous system. You aren't calm in the traditional sense. You are vibrationally still. You are like a coiled spring that has been held back for so long that the eventual release will be explosive. This psychological warfare also affects your sense of time. When you are wealthed, time is measured in meals and leisure. When you are starving, time is measured in intervals of endurance. You learn to live in the now because the future is too hungry to contemplate. This presence of mind is exactly what a general wants in the heat of a phalanx clash. You don't worry about what happens after the battle. You only worry about the next 6 inches of the spear thrust. The starvation rituals have effectively pruned your brain, cutting away the long-term anxieties that cause men to hesitate. As you stand on the training field, the sun beating down on your lean, scarred shoulders, you feel a sense of absolute clarity. You are empty, and because you are empty, you are light. You are no longer weighed down by the ballast of desire. Your mother's voice, which once sounded like a command, now sounds like a fundamental law of physics. Hunger is not a deficit, she seemed to say. It is a sharpening. You'll realize that the psychological warfare of the belly has been won. You have conquered the most basic human drive, and in doing so, you have made yourself the master of every man who hasn't. You are a Spartan, and you are ready to feast on the only thing that matters, the glory of the win. As you move into your late teens, the starvation rituals transition from the barracks into the dark underbelly of the Lacedaemonian landscape. You are now participating in the Helot hunts, a grim reality of your education that blends systemic terror with your ongoing nutritional deprivation. The Helots outnumber the Spartans by nearly 10 to 1, and the state maintains its grip through a combination of psychological dominance and the cryptio, the secret service. You are sent out into the night with nothing but a dagger and your wits. You aren't given a ration pack for this mission. If you want to eat while you are patrolling the borders or monitoring the enslaved population, you must take it from the very people you are tasked with suppressing. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the darker side of Spartan discipline. Every year, the ephors declared war on the helots, legally allowing Spartan youths to kill them without the risk of blood pollution or religious crime. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine security measure to cull the strongest helots, or if it was primarily a field training exercise designed to blood the youths and test their ability to survive on an empty stomach in hostile territory. To you, it feels like the ultimate test of the art of the stealthy thief. You are moving through the shadows of the Messenian farms, your ribs pressing against your skin, knowing that a single mistake, a snapped twig, or a heavy breath could alert a desperate helot who has nothing left to lose but his life. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these hunts. The Spartans believed that fear is the best seasoning for a stolen meal. You are encouraged to stay invisible, but you are also expected to be a ghost that eats. You might find a small cache of olives or a jar of honey hidden in a helot's hut. Taking it isn't just about survival, it's about reinforcing the hierarchy. You might say that the Spartan ride-along program is less about civic duty and more about becoming a high-stakes porch pirate with a bronze blade. It's the kind of internship where the performance review is based on how many calories you can steal without being seen by the very people you re-robbing. You find yourself crouched in a grove of silver-leafed olives, watching a small fire in a hillet village. The smell of roasting grain is almost physically painful. Your stomach, shrunk by years of scant rations, twists into a tight, hard knot. But you don't rush in. You wait. You have been trained to outwait the sun itself. You remember your mother's stories of the great silence required of a warrior. She would tell you that the most dangerous man is the one who isn't there until he is. You move closer, your bare feet finding the softest patches of earth. You aren't just hunting for a person. You are hunting for the strength to keep going. There's a light joke to be found in this grim business. A Spartan's idea of ordering in is just waiting for a helot to finish cooking and then making a very silent, very sharp complaint about the service. Or perhaps that the only growth mindset in the cryptia is the growth of your appetite, while you re-hiding in a bush. You realize that this is where the starvation rituals become truly lethal. When you are hungry, you are a predator. When you are full, you are prey. By keeping you on the edge of starvation, the state ensures you never become complacent. You are always looking for the next meal, the next target, the next advantage. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding the helot hunts. Historians still argue whether the cryptia was a formal unit of the Agoge or a separate elite rite of passage for those who showed the most. Promise in the initial starvation trials, whether you are elite or not, the experience is the same. You are a shadow in your own land. You see the fear in the eyes of the people you watch, and it doesn't move you. Your empathy was starved out of you years ago, replaced by a cold, functional loyalty to the Spartan machine. You realize that your mother's lack of warmth was the greatest gift she could have given you. It made you compatible with a world that requires you to be a monster. You manage to snatch a small bag of dried figs from a windowsill. You retreat back into the darkness, moving with a speed that seems impossible for someone so lean. You don't eat them yet. You wait until you are miles away, hidden in a mountain crevice. When you finally taste the sugar of the figs, it feels like an explosion in your brain. This is the chemical reward of the hunt. Because you have been starved, the hit of the food is more powerful than any drug. It reinforces the behavior. Silence equals food, and food equals life. As the dawn breaks, casting a cold gray light over the valley, you return to the designated meeting point. Your face is as impassive as ever, but inside, you feel a dark sense of accomplishment. You have moved through the world of the other and taken what you needed without being detected. The helot hunts have taught you that the world is divided into those who eat and those who are eaten. The starvation isn't just a physical trial, it's a moral boundary. You have crossed it, and in doing so, you have become a true instrument of Spartan policy. You are a Spartan, and you are the master of the shadows and the belly alike. Your body has become a stranger to the concept of fullness, but in its place, you have discovered a terrifyingly efficient new reality, the science of Spartan metabolism. At 18, you are no longer a growing boy struggling against the void. You are a biological machine that has undergone a forced evolution. Years of deliberate childhood starvation and functional deprivation have altered your internal chemistry. You move through the world with a lean, corded strength that seems to defy the laws of physics. While an Athenian youth might feel faint if he misses his midday meal, your blood sugar is a steady, unshakable baseline. You have been trained to tap into the very marrow of your bones for energy. A mainstream historical fact that made the Spartan infantry the most resilient force in the ancient Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether the Spartan diet, specifically the high-protein, iron-rich black soup combined with chronic caloric restriction, induced a state of permanent ketosis, or if the sheer volume of physical activity simply maximized their mitochondrial efficiency. To you, it isn't a theory, it's the way your skin feels tight against your muscles. You find that your senses have sharpened to an almost supernatural degree. When you are functionally starving, your hearing becomes acute, picking up the rustle of a lizard in the dry brush from 20 paces. Your night vision, honed by years of moonlit thefts and the cryptia, allows you to navigate the jagged limestone as if it were midday. You aren't weak from hunger, you are honed by it. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about the Spartan look that survives in ancient anecdotes. It was said that a Spartan could be identified in any crowd, not by his cloak, but by his steady eye and rhythmic breath. Because your metabolism has been slowed to a cold, efficient simmer, you don't fidget. You don't waste energy on nervous tics or unnecessary gestures. You move only when there is a reason to move. You might say that the Spartans were the first to master the intermittent fasting trend, but they forgot to tell everyone that the eating window was usually just a 15-minute window to avoid a beating. It's the kind of biohacking where the app is just a very angry man with a stick. You find yourself standing in the heat of a high summer drill. The sun is a relentless hammer, and the dust of the plain is thick in your throat. Any other man would be dreaming of a cool spring and a loaf of bread, but you feel a strange, detached clarity. Your metabolism has shifted into its war state. Your brain is fueled by the absolute minimum, leaving no room for the noise of luxury. You recall your mother's voice again, a constant ghost in your ear. The gut is a liar. The will is the master. She knew that by starving the boy, the state was feeding the warrior's focus. You realize that your body is no longer your own. It is a piece of living technology owned by the city of Sparta. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan's metabolic rate is essentially just spite. Or perhaps that the only thing fast about your fasting is how quickly you can disappear into the shadows when an instructor looks your way. You realize that the Agoge has turned your biological needs into a set of toggle switches. You can turn off the signal for hunger. You can turn down the signal for pain. You are becoming what the modern world might call transhuman, a person who has moved beyond the basic limitations of the species through the sheer force of ritualized deprivation. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this physiological state. Historians still argue whether the legendary Spartan agony was a psychological performance of toughness or a genuine physiological adaptation to chronic undernourishment. Watching your brothers, you see the truth. It's a specialized form of predatory health. You aren't healthy in the way a farmer is healthy, bursting with color and vitality. You are healthy in the way a spear point is healthy, cold, hard, and ready for use. The science of Spartan metabolism is the study of how much a human being can lose before they become unstoppable. This period of your life is where you realize the long game of the starvation rituals. By depriving you of food, they didn't just teach you how to steal. They taught your body how to survive the impossible. When the day comes that you are trapped in a mountain pass or a besieged fort, you won't be the first to die. You will be the last. Your body has been trained for the end of the world. You have lived in the void for so long that the void has become your natural habitat. You are a biological paradox, a man who is most alive when he has the least to live on. As the drill ends and you are permitted to return to the shade, you don't reach for your water skin immediately. You wait. You test your self-control one more time. You feel the pulse in your neck, slow and steady. The functional starvation has given you a level of mastery over your own internal organs that other men will never know. You are a Spartan, and your metabolism is not a burden, it is your most loyal soldier. You lie back against a stone, the hunger a familiar, friendly hum in your core, and wait for the next command. You are ready for anything, because you have already endured everything. As you enter the final years of your transition to full manhood, the starvation rituals take on a sophisticated social dimension, social hierarchy through scarcity. In the barracks, food has become the primary currency of power and respect. You've noticed that the arenas, the older youths who have survived the most brutal years of the Agoge want, just eat more. They decide who else gets to eat. A single scrap of fat, or a handful of grain, can be used to reward a loyal follower, or humiliate a rival. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Spartan system was built on a series of nested hierarchies where those with seniority exercised absolute control over the physical needs of their subordinates. Scarcity wasn't just an environmental condition, it was a management tool. Historians still argue whether this hierarchy of hunger was designed to foster a sense of competitive brotherhood, or if it was a darker experiment in social engineering to ensure that Spartans were more comfortable with internal discipline than external threats. To you, it's a daily chess match. You've learned that the smallest morsel of food can be used to forge an alliance. If you share a stolen egg with a boy who is lagging behind, you haven't just performed an act of kindness, you have bought a lifelong debt. Conversely, the elders use food to create dominance displays, eating heartily in front of you while you are forced to stand at attention. This reinforces the idea that the only path to satisfaction is through the ranks of the state. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the social life of the barracks. The Spartans practiced a form of obligatory sharing that was paradoxically selfish. If you were caught with an abundance of food, you were expected to donate it to the mess. But the social credit you received for doing so was more valuable than the calories. It was a way of turning a physical asset into a political one. You might say that the Spartan social media was just a series of very tense dinners where the likes were not getting punched and the followers were just people, hoping you'd drop a piece of bread. It's the kind of networking event where the open bar is just a communal bucket of water, and the keynote speaker is a man telling you that your existence is a privilege, not a right. You find yourself in a position of burgeoning authority. You are now the one watching the younger herds with a critical eye. You see a 10-year-old boy shivering, his eyes fixed on your meager ration of broth. For a moment, you remember the hand of your mother on your shoulder and the cold weight of the shield she gave you. You realize that your mother's discipline was the foundation of this entire social pyramid. She didn't just train you to be hungry, she trained you to be a leader who can regulate the hunger of others. You offer the boy a small piece of your barley cake, not because you are soft, but because you are investing in the strength of the unit. You are learning that in Sparta, power is the ability to say who eats and when. There is a light joke to be made here, a Spartan. This idea of climbing the corporate ladder is just moving from the guy who steals the bread to the guy who tells people it's okay to steal the bread. Or perhaps, that the only promotion you care about is the one that comes with an extra olive. You realize that the Agoge has turned the basic human instinct for survival into a sophisticated system of meritocratic deprivation. The more you can endure, and the more you can help others endure, the higher you rise. You aren't an individual competing for a meal. You are a piece of a hierarchy competing for the survival of the city. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this social structure. Historians still argue whether the Spartan focus on communal scarcity successfully eliminated the greed that destroyed other Greek democracies, or if it simply replaced it with a more violent pursuit of status. From where you stand, status is everything. A man with status gets the best position in the phalanx. A man with status represents his family in the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. And status, in the world of the Agoge, is forged in the fire of shared starvation. You see your brothers as both your competitors and your kin, a paradox that can only exist when everyone is equally empty. This realization brings a new kind of discipline. You no longer steal just for yourself. You coordinate raids with your unit, learning to manage resources like a quartermaster. You are learning that a starving man is a dangerous individual, but a starving unit is an unstoppable force of nature. The social hierarchy of scarcity has taught you that the state is a body, and like any body, it must prioritize which parts get the most energy. You have accepted your place in that body, and you are working every day to become the heart or the arm rather than the foot. As the evening meal ends and you lead the younger boys back to their reeds, you feel a sense of grim satisfaction. You have successfully navigated another day of the social minefield. You are lean, you are hungry, and you are in control. The starvation rituals have done more than harden your body. They have organized your world. You look at the stars over the Peloponnesus and realize that you are no longer a victim of the system, you are a guardian of it. You are a Spartan, and you have learned that the greatest luxury isn't food, but the authority to decide who deserves to have it. The hunger has finally silenced the chatter of your youth, and in its place, you have found the rhetoric of the laconic. This isn't just a stylistic choice in how you speak. It is a physiological necessity born from the starvation rituals. When your body is operating on a caloric deficit for years at a time, you quickly learn that breath is energy. And energy is a resource you cannot afford to squander on flowery adjectives or Athenian oratory. In the Agoge, you are taught that a man who uses many words is often trying to hide a lack of action. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Spartans were world-renowned for their laconic wit, short, pungent, and devastatingly direct communication that prioritized the strike over the fluff. Historians still argue whether this linguistic brevity was a byproduct of the extreme physical exhaustion of the Agoge or a curated cultural performance designed to intimidate the more talkative Greek states. To you, it's a matter of survival. When you are marching 30 miles on a handful of barley, you don't waste air talking about the beauty of the landscape. You save your breath for the rhythmic breathing of the march. You find that hunger makes you remarkably honest with your language. There is no room for lies when your brain is focused on the next potential source of protein. You learn to speak in shorthand, communicating complex tactical maneuvers with a grunt, a gesture, or a single noun. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about Spartan speech that highlights the intersection of the belly and the tongue. It was said that during the communal meals, the elders would ask the boys questions that required a measured and pointed answer. If you took too long to get to the point, or if your answer was flabby, you were punished often by having your thumb bitten by an elder. You might say that the Spartan Twitter was just a man biting your hand if you went over 140 characters. It's the kind of communication workshop where the feedback is a literal puncture wound and the edit button is your own pain threshold. You realize that your mother's curt commands when you were 5 were your first lessons in this linguistic efficiency. You find yourself standing before an instructor who is critiquing your performance in a Night Scout exercise. He asks why you were detected by the enemy sentry. A boy from another city might have offered a long explanation about the wind, the loose gravel, or the quality of his cloak. You simply look him in the eye and say, "Careless." That single word carries the weight of your failure. And your commitment to fix it. The instructor nods and moves on. You've saved yourself the energy of an excuse, and in doing so, you've maintained your dignity. The starvation has pruned your vocabulary just as it has pruned your body fat, leaving only the lean, hard muscle of the truth. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan best-selling novel is probably just 3 pages long and ends with everyone dying for the state. Or perhaps that the only thing shorter than a Spartan's speech is the list of ingredients in his dinner. You realize that the Agoge has turned your voice into a weapon of war. By keeping you in a state of vocal starvation, the state ensures that when a Spartan does speak, the world listens. Your silence is a form of power. It suggests a reservoir of untapped strength, a man who is so focused on his objective that he doesn't need to explain himself to anyone. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this laconic style. Historians still argue whether the Spartans' brevity was a sign of intellectual depth or a symptom of a culture that had suppressed individual thought in favor of military utility. From your perspective, it's about the strike. In a phalanx, you don't need a speech, you need a signal. By training you to communicate with the absolute minimum of effort, the Agoge is preparing you for the chaos of the battlefield, where long sentences are lost in the clash of bronze. You are becoming a man of singular intent. This linguistic discipline also reinforces the social hierarchy. You don't speak unless spoken to, and when you do, you show your respect through brevity. You remember a story of a Spartan who, when asked why he had such a short sword, replied, "Because I stand close to my enemy." Your speech is like that sword. It doesn't need to be long to be effective. It just needs to be sharp. Your mother's voice remains the gold standard for this. You can still hear her telling you, with it or on it. 5 words that defined your entire life. She didn't need a poem to tell you what she expected. She needed a formula. As the sun sets over the barracks, you sit in silence with your brothers. You don't need to talk to them to know they are hungry, tired, and ready. The shared silence of 20 starving teenagers is a more powerful bond than any Athenian oath. You have moved beyond the need for noise. The starvation rituals have taught you that the most important things in life couldn't be said. They can only be done. You lie down on your reeds. The rhetoric of the laconic settling into your mind like a heavy shield. You are a Spartan, and you have learned that the less you say, the more you are. While your life is a monochrome landscape of gray stone and red cloaks, there are rare moments where the state allows the pressure to break. You have reached the age where you participate in the great religious festivals, like the Hyacinthia or the Gymnopedia. These are the festival feasts and false hope. For a brief, dizzying window, the starvation rituals are suspended by divine decree. The city smells of roasted lamb, honeyed cakes, and wine. You are allowed and encouraged even to eat. But this isn't a gift. It is a sophisticated tactical stress test for your self-control. After years of a shrunken stomach, being presented with a mountain of food is a psychological minefield. This is a mainstream historical fact. Spartan festivals were massive civic events that involved athletic competitions, choral dances, and communal banquets. Historians still argue whether these periodic feasts were meant to prevent chronic malnutrition in the warrior class or if they served as a controlled release. For the social tensions built up by the Agoge's brutality, for you, the experience is almost painful. Your digestive system, accustomed to the metallic black soup and stolen raw grain, reacts with shock to the sudden influx of rich fats and sugars. You find that your hunger has become a habit you don't know how to break. You see younger boys gorge themselves until they are sick, a sight the elders watch with a mixture of amusement and judgment. They are looking to see who keeps their Spartan head, even when the belly is finally invited to the party. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these festivals. The Spartans had a specific official called the kratos, the metistrabutor, whose job was to ensure that even during a feast, every portion was exactly equal. There was no aliukaniat in Sparta. You might say that the Spartan Golden Corral is just a man with a scale and a very stern expression. It's the kind of buffet where the desert bar is just another piece of meat that is slightly less salty than the first one. You realize that even in the midst of plenty, the state is still counting your calories. Your mother's voice is there too, reminding you that gluttony is a slave's vice. She would be horrified to see you lose your wiry look for an afternoon's pleasure. You sit among your brothers, a platter of roasted pork before you. The smell is intoxicating, but you find yourself eating with a slow, mechanical precision. You've been trained to view food as a resource, and you find it difficult to transition back into enjoyment. This is the false hope of the festival. You know that tomorrow the fires will be cold, the leftovers will be gone, and you will be back to stealing eggs and chewing on reeds. The feast is a reminder of what you are missing, a cruel before and after shot of a life you've been forced to abandon. You feel a strange sense of mourning for the boy you were, the one who would have cheered at the sight of a honey cake. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan cheat day is the only time in history where the guilt comes from the fact that you actually feel full. Or perhaps that the only thing more regular than a Spartan's discipline is his digestive distress after the annual festival feast. You realize that the Agoge has broken your ability to be a normal consumer. You are like a deep-sea creature brought to the surface. The lack of pressure, the lack of hunger feels wrong. You find yourself almost looking forward to the return of the scant rations because at least you know who you are when you re-hungry. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding these festivals. Historians still argue whether these moments of luxury were a pragmatic necessity to keep the population from revolting or a calculated re-entry. Test to see who had been truly civilized by the Agoge. You see a fellow youth who has clearly overindulged, his face flushed and his movements sluggish. He has failed the test. He has allowed the false hope to make him soft. You, however, stop eating while you are still slightly hungry. You have internalized the ritual of the remainder. You have proven that you can stand in the middle of a feast and still be a master of the void. This period of the Agoge is where you learn that plenty is more dangerous than scarcity. Scarcity makes you sharp. Plenty makes you slow. You start to understand why your mother was so adamant about the discipline of the hearth. She was protecting you from the temptation of the festival when you are standing in a shield wall against a Persian army that has infinite supplies. Your greatest advantage will be that you don't care about their food. You've been to the feast, and you've realized it doesn't offer anything that the iron life hasn't already provided. As the festival ends and the sun sets over a city littered with the bones of the sacrifice, You feel the familiar gnaw of your stomach beginning to return. You welcome it. The hunger is honest. The feast was a masquerade. You return to the barracks, your single cloak feeling more comfortable than the silk robes you saw the visitors wearing. You lie down on your reeds, the taste of the pork already a memory, and prepare for the return to the real Sparta. You are a Spartan, and you have survived the most dangerous thing the world can throw at you, a full stomach. The festivals leave a lingering bitterness in the back of your throat, a reminder that the world of color and fat is not for you. You are pulled back into the stark, gray reality of Lacedaemonian economics, where the iron currency trap serves as the final guardrail against the temptation of food. In other cities, a hungry boy might dream of finding a silver drachma to buy his way out of starvation. But in your world, the great lawgiver Lycurgus ensured that money itself was a physical trial. Spartan currency consists of heavy, brittle iron spits, or obloi, which have been quenched in vinegar to make them useless for any other purpose. This is a mainstream historical fact. The sheer weight and worthlessness of Spartan money made it nearly impossible to hoard, steal, or use for the secret purchase of luxury goods. Historians still argue whether this iron currency was a genuine economic policy designed to prevent the rise of a merchant class, or if it was a psychological anchor intended to keep your focus entirely on the state rather than on personal gain. For you, it means that even if you managed to acquire some wealth, you couldn't use it to solve your hunger. To buy a single loaf of extra bread, you would need to carry a bundle of iron so heavy and noisy that the pedonomos would hear your wallet clanking from a mile away. You are trapped in a system where the only way to get ahead is to be better at being a Spartan, not better at being a consumer. The starvation rituals are reinforced by this monetary wall-you-can-tee by your way out of the Agoge's void. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these iron spits. It was said that a full wallet in Sparta required a cart and a pair of oxen to move it across town. Imagine being a starving teenager, ribs showing, trying to stealthily move 50 pounds of iron just to bribe a cook for a bowl of lentils. It's an absurdity that makes the very idea of greed feel ridiculous. You might say that the Spartan banking system is the only one in history that doubles as a weightlifting, routine, and a permanent discouragement from shopping. It's the kind of fiscal policy where the ATM is just a pile of scrap metal and the interest rate is how much your back hurts from carrying your savings. You realize that your mother's lack of jewelry was not about poverty, but about the total rejection of the soft metals that make other nations weak. You find yourself looking at the merchants from the Periodicas around, who handle the actual trade for the city. They have gold, they have silver, but you have been taught to view their wealth with a cold, hungry contempt. To a Spartan, a man who relies on silver to eat is a man who can be controlled by whoever holds the silver. Because you are fed by your own cunning and the state's meager broth, you are free. The iron currency trap has stripped away the middleman of commerce. Your relationship with the world is direct. You see what you need, and you either have the discipline to take it or the strength to do without it. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan purse snatcher is just a guy who's looking to get a hernia for no reason. Or perhaps that the only liquid assets you have are the sweat on your brow and the vinegar in your soup. You realize that the Agoge has turned you into an economic ghost. You exist outside the world of buying and selling. This makes you a nightmare for a foreign diplomat or a Persian spy. They can offer you a bribe because there's nothing for you to spend it on, and you've even trained to view a full stomach as a sign of a slave's heart. The starvation has made you unbuyable. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this economic isolation. Historians still argue whether the iron currency actually crippled the Spartan economy in the long run, or if it successfully insulated the warrior caste from the moral decay of the surrounding Greek world. Looking at the calluses on your hands, you don't care about the economy. You care about the fact that your lack of money has forced you to develop a more valuable currency, your own endurance. You have learned that in a crisis, a man with a silver coin will die of hunger. But a man who can eat reeds and keep moving will inherit the earth. This period of the Agoge is where the starvation becomes a form of high-level sovereignty. You are a king of nothing. By having no money and no food, you have no vulnerabilities. You recall your mother's voice telling you that a Spartan's only true possession is his honor. She knew that if you ever tasted the easy life that money provides, you would lose the edge that keeps you alive. The iron currency is just the physical manifestation of her iron will. It's a heavy, clanking reminder that your path is narrow and paved with rust. As you return to the barracks, your pockets literally empty because the very idea of a pocket is useless to you. You feel a strange sense of lightness. The iron currency trap has finished the job that the scant rations started. It has decoupled your happiness from your possessions. You lie down on your bed of reeds, the hunger a familiar companion, and realize that you are the wealthiest man in Greece, not because of what you have, but because of what you no longer need. You are a Spartan, and you have learned that the only thing worth spending is your life, and the only thing worth buying is the continued freedom of your city. As you approach the threshold of adulthood, the starvation rituals are no longer just about your relationship with the instructors or your herd. They have returned to their source, mothers as the final judges. In Sparta, a mother's oversight doesn't end when you leave her house. It merely transitions into a form of public surveillance. You have reached the age where the city holds the shaming rituals, and it is here that the women of Sparta, led by the mothers, exercise their most terrifying power. They gather to observe the final trials of the youths, and they are not there to cheer. They are there to castigate any boy who showed weakness, who cried at the altar, or who looks unfit for the phalanx. This is a mainstream historical fact that underscores the unique social agency of Spartan women. They were the primary creators of the coward, while the men might offer a grim nod to a struggling youth. The mothers were known to compose satirical songs and public insults to heap upon those who failed. To meet the standard of the Agoge, historians still argue whether this was a form of state-mandated cruelty designed to eliminate any residual family sentiment that might interfere with military duty, or if it was a genuine expression of a culture that viewed motherhood as a military rank. For you, it means that the eyes of your mother are the most dangerous weapons in the city. You stand in the square, your stomach hollow and your ribs a ladder of bone, knowing that if she sees a flicker of self-pity in your eyes, her rejection will be more painful than any lash. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about these rituals that highlights the inversion of normal parenting. It was said that if a boy was caught stealing and showed shame or guilt, his mother would be the one to mock him for his lack of daring. The crime wasn't the theft. The crime was the lack of confidence. You might say that the Spartan participation trophy is just a very loud, very public song about how much you suck and how your mother wishes she had a girl instead. It's the kind of performance review where the HR department is your own parent and the improvement plan is a social exile that could last a lifetime. You realize that her early refusal to comfort your childhood fears was a mercy. She was inoculating you against the poison of her own potential shame. You see her across the square. She is looking at your unit. You don't wave and you don't smile. You simply stand as a pillar of bronze and bone. You feel the hunger clawing at you, but you also feel the maternal judgment acting as a secondary spine. You recall the stories of mothers who, upon seeing their sons flee from battle, would wait for them at the city gates to kill them with their own hands. This isn't just a legend to you, it is the atmosphere you breathe. The starvation rituals have prepared you for this by teaching you that your physical life is secondary to your social utility. If you aren't a warrior, you aren't her son. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan mother's idea of constructive criticism is just pointing at you and laughing until you decide to go fight a war. Or perhaps that the only unconditional love in Sparta is the unconditional love of a woman for a winner. You realize that the Agoge has turned your family tree into a list of performance metrics. You aren't growing up. You are scaling up for the state's production line. This final judgment is the quality control check. By being the ones to shame the weak, the mothers ensure that the mirage of Spartan invincibility remains unbroken by internal soft-heartedness. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this maternal role. Historians still argue whether this public shaming by women was a symptom of a toxic military culture or a highly effective social mechanism that bypassed the need for a massive police force. From your perspective, it's a matter of the gaze. When you are cold and hungry in the wild, you aren't thinking about the E4s, you are thinking about her face. You are thinking about the songs she might sing. This psychological tether is what keeps you silent when the fox bites and keeps you moving when the boots are gone. The ritual of the judge has internalized the state's expectations into a maternal voice that never sleeps. This period of your life is where you realize that the starvation was a gift of social armor. Because you have nothing, no food, no comfort, no soft words, you have nothing that can be used to shame you except your own performance. You are clean. By stripping away the distractions of a normal childhood, your mother has given you a singular focus. You don't need her to love you in the way other mothers love their sons. You need her to respect you. And in Sparta, respect is only given to the hungry who remain silent and the bleeding who remain upright. As the shaming rituals end and the women depart, leaving a heavy silence in the square, you feel a surge of grim relief. You weren't the target today, you stood the test. You look at the dust where she stood and feel a cold, distant gratitude. She has made you into something that can survive the world's indifference. You return to the barracks, your stomach growling but your head held high. The mothers, as the final judges, have spoken, and you have been found worthy of the next step. You are a Spartan, and you have learned that the only thing more sustaining than bread is the silent approval of a woman who would rather see you dead than average. The years of the Agoge are drawing to a close, and the transition from a starving youth to a professional soldier is nearly complete. Now, you must learn how the years of deprivation translate to the front line, the phalanx and the empty gut. You are finally permitted to stand in the heavy ranks of the hoplite wall, a transformation that turns your individual hunger into a collective weapon. In any other Greek city, a general worries about his supply lines. He knows that if his men miss a meal, their morale will crumble like dry clay. But you have been trained to view a full stomach as a liability. On the morning of a battle, a Spartan unit often goes into the clash, having eaten nothing but a bit of that bitter black soup. This is a mainstream historical fact that gave the Spartans a terrifying psychological edge. They were the masters of the fasting assault. Historians still argue whether the Spartan preference for fighting on an empty stomach was due to the belief that it prevented sluggishness and nausea from abdominal wounds, or if it was a final display of the battlefield discipline. Instilled since childhood, to you, it's about the weight of the shield. You've spent a decade carrying the world on your shoulders, while your belly was a void. When the phalanx closes, ranks the isthmos, or shove your lean, corded muscle doesn't fail. You don't have the soft weight of a whelped man to slow you down. You are a biological spring, coiled and ready to snap. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the empty gut in the phalanx. It was rumored that Spartan warriors would tighten their leather belts to the point of pain before a charge, using the physical constriction to distract the mind from the hunger and to narrow their focus. You might say that the Spartan pre-game ritual is basically just a corset for killers and a prayer to Artemis that the guy next to you didn't steal your water. It's the kind of locker room vibe where the pep talk is just a reminder that the enemy has better food than you, so you might as well take it from there, cold, dead hands. You realize that your mother's voice is the one keeping your shield steady. She's the one who told you that the phalanx is a single body, and a body with no fat moves faster. You feel the breath of the man behind your herd brother from the barracks. You both know the exact measure of each other's endurance because you've shared the same reeds and the same starvation. This is the chemical bond of the void. Because you have both been deprived, you are both reliable. You know he won't break for a piece of bread, and he knows you won't drop your shield because of a cramp. The starvation has removed the variables of human weakness. In the phalanx, you aren't an individual. You are a link in an iron chain that has been tempered by 10 years of hunger. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan-esque idea of a power lunch is just pushing the guy in front of you until he falls over. Or perhaps that the only thing well-rounded in a Spartan unit is the shape of the shields. Because the men certainly aren't. You realize that the Agoge has turned the shove of the phalanx into a metabolic event. You are burning the very last of your reserves to hold that line. And because you've lived in that reserve state your entire life, you are comfortable there. An Athenian would be panicking as his blood sugar drops. You are just entering your work zone. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding the phalanx. Historians still argue whether the legendary Spartan steadiness was a result of superior drill or a psychological byproduct of the chronic under-rehearsal caused by long-term malnutrition. Looking at the row of bronze helmets to your left and right, you see only the wolf stare. It doesn't feel like malnutrition. It feels like clarity. You are undistracted by the fear of death because you already survived the slow death of the Agoge every single day. The phalanx is simply the place where your hunger finally finds a target. This period of your training is the reaping of what your mother sowed. Every night she left you to cry, every meal she denied you, every time she checked your ribs for fatigue, was all for this moment. She wasn't building a son, she was building a picket for the state. You realize that the empty gut is why the Spartan line doesn't move. A man with a full belly has something to lose. A man who is empty has only the wind to fill him up. You are the most dangerous kind of soldier, one who has been taught that comfort is a lie and that the only truth is the weight of the spear in your hand. As the signal for the charge sounds a low, haunting flute melody rather than a chaotic trumpet chew, move forward. You don't scream, you march in a terrifying, rhythmic silence. Your stomach is empty, your feet are bare, and your heart is a cold stone. The phalanx and the empty gut has reached its final expression. You are no longer a boy of the Agoge. You are a Spartan hoplite, and the world is about to learn that hunger is the most lethal weapon in the Lacedaemonian arsenal. You move as one, a wall of bronze driven by a decade of ritualized deprivation. The flute players have stopped their melody, and the dust of the training fields has settled into the creases of your weathered skin. You have reached the transition to warriorhood, the final threshold where the boy who is defined by what he lacked becomes the man who is defined by what he can protect. You are 20 years old. In the eyes of the Spartan state, the starvation rituals are no longer a pedagogy. They are a baseline requirement. You are about to be elected into a secessia, the adult mess hall. This is a mainstream historical fact that served as the ultimate graduation from the Agoge. If you are not voted into a mess by a unanimous secret ballot of the existing members, you are relegated to the status of an inferior, a man without a place in the city's heart. Historians still argue whether the secret ballot was a way to ensure total social cohesion or a brutal method of culling those who had survived the starvation but failed the test of character. To you, it feels like the final fox in the tunic. You have spent 13 years being empty, and now you must hope that your emptiness was seen as a virtue by the men you once watched from the shadows. The transition is a ritual of the gut once more. You must contribute a monthly quota of barley, wine, cheese, and figs to the mess. This brings your childhood of theft and scarcity into a sharp, ironic focus. You spent your youth stealing food because you had none. Now you must produce food for the state to prove you are a man. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about this transition. If a single no-vota piece of bread rolled into a ball and thrown into a bowl was cast against you, your candidacy was rejected. You might say that the Spartan LinkedIn is just a bowl of dough and a room full of guys who remember that one time you tripped during a barefoot march 10 years ago. It's the kind of job interview where the background check is a literal lifetime of shared misery, and the onboarding process is just finally being allowed to sit down while you eat your blood soup. You realize that your mother's insistence on your laconic reputation was her way of ensuring you would unsay anything stupid enough to earn a no vote from an elder. You stand before the members of your potential mess. You are lean, your skin is like tanned leather, and your eyes have the predatory stillness of a man who has lived on the edge of the world. They look at you, and they don't see a stranger. They see the results of their own system. They see the scars from the altar of Artemis, Orthia, and the calluses from the river reeds. You are a mirror of their own past. This is the sublimation of the individual. The moment you realize that the Agoge didn't just break you, it remade you in the image of the men who are now judging you. The starvation was the negative space that allowed the Spartan identity to be filled in. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan graduation ceremony, docenti, have a cap and gown. It just has a slightly larger bowl of soup and a spear that actually belongs to you. Or perhaps that the only diploma you get is the realization that you are now legally obligated to be hungry for the rest of your life. You realize that the Agoge has prepared you for the most important transition of all, from being a ward of the state to being a stakeholder in it. You are no longer eating the state's food, you are feeding the state's soul. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this transition. Historians still argue whether the extreme exclusivity of the Spartan mess halls led to the city's eventual oliganthropia, the catastrophic decline, in the number of full citizens, or if it was the secret to their 2 centuries of military dominance. In this moment, the long-term survival of the city doesn't matter. Only the bowl matters. You hear the results. Unanimous. You are a homoios, a peer. You are an equal among the most elite warriors on earth. The starvation rituals have paid their final dividend. You are no longer a herd animal. You are a member of the pack. This transition also changes your relationship with your mother. You are now a man who can represent her in the world. When you return to her home to collect your belongings for the move to the adult barracks, she looks at you differently. There is no hug, but she offers you a cup of wind diluted. Of course, because Spartans loathe drunkenness. It is a gesture of peer-to-peer respect. You have survived the fire she threw you into. You have walked through the void of childhood and come out with your shield and your honor intact. As you walk toward the adult mess for your first official meal as a citizen, you feel a strange sense of weight. It isn't just the bronze armor or the heavy iron currency, it is the weight of responsibility. You are now the guardian of the rituals that forged you. You will be the one watching the next generation of 7-year-olds as they enter the Agoge. Will be the shadow they look to for guidance. You are a Spartan, and the transition is complete. The hunger hasn't gone away, it has just become a permanent part of your strength. You take your seat at the wooden table, the smell of the black soup rising to meet you, and for the first time in your life, you feel like you are exactly where you are supposed to be. The hunger you carried through the Agoge was never just about your own survival. It was an inheritance. As you take your place among the ranks of the adult warriors, you begin to see the ghost of Leonidas in every ritualized deprivation. You realize that you are part of a lineage of men who were built, cell by cell, out of the same childhood starvation and cold limestone. The legendary king who held the pass at Thermopylae, didn't he become a hero the day he faced the Persians? He became a hero the day he first learned to steal his dinner and keep his mouth shut. This is a mainstream historical fact. Every Spartan king, with rare exceptions, had to undergo the Agoge, just like the lowliest citizen. There was no royal exemption from the scant rations. Historians still argue whether this shared experience of childhood misery was the primary reason for the absolute loyalty Spartan kings commanded, or if it simply ensured that the leadership was as physically durable as the rank and file. When you look at the elders in your mess, you see the ghosts of past generations. You see the same lean faces that stood against the great King Xerxes. You are being taught that your hunger is the thread that connects you to the glorious dead. Leonidas didn't just lead men, he led a pack of starved wolves who had been trained since the age of 7 to believe that comfort was a sign of the enemy. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the Spartan memory of Leonidas. It was said that after the Agoge, a Spartan's body was so accustomed to functional starvation that they could march for 3 days on nothing but the memory of a meal. While that's a bit of poetic license, the psychological reality is that you are fueled by a sense of historical debt. You might say that the Spartan ancestor worship is just a bunch of guys sitting around in the dark, being hungry together, and agreeing that their grandfathers were even hungrier. It's the kind of family reunion where the slideshow is just a series of scars and the catering is a collective nod toward a statue. You find yourself standing on the very ground where the legends were made. As you look out over the Eurutas, you realize that your mother's shield speech wasn't just a personal command. It was the echo of centuries of Spartan women who had sent their sons into the void. The ghost of Leonidas is the spirit of a city that refuses to be bought because it has already lost everything it could possibly lose. By starving you, the state has removed your leash. A man who needs a feast can be controlled by the one who provides it. A man who needs nothing but his shield and his ghosts is the most dangerous man in the world. There's a light joke to be made here. A Spartan's idea of following in his father's footsteps is just stepping on the same sharp rocks, barefoot, and hoping for the best. Or perhaps that the only inheritance you get in Sparta is a slightly used red cloak and a permanent craving for olives. You realize that the Agoge has turned history into a biological reality. You aren't just learning about the past, you are embodying it through your own suffering. The starvation rituals have made the legends of the 300 feel like a contemporary news report rather than a distant myth. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding this historical continuity. Historians still argue whether the Spartans' obsession with the past and their rigid adherence to the Agoge prevented them from adapting to a changing world, or if it was the only thing that kept their unique culture from being swallowed by the rising tides of Persian and Macedonian influence. From your perspective, the rigidity is the point. You don't want to change, you want to be iron. Iron doesn't adapt, it resists, and your hunger is the carbon that turns the iron of your soul into steel. This period of your life is where you find communion with the fallen. You start to understand why the Spartans were the only Greeks who did unfear the dark or the unknown. You've been living in the dark and the unknown since you were 7. You've already met the ghost of Leonidas in the barracks when the wind was howling and your stomach was empty. He was the one telling you to stay still. He was the one telling you that the pain is temporary, but the shame of being soft is forever. As you stand at attention during the morning drills, the sun catching the bronze of your shield, you feel the weight of the generations behind you. You aren't just a soldier. You are a vessel for the Lacedaemonian spirit. The ghost of Leonidas is not a haunting, it is a homecoming. You have survived the starvation, the whips, and the silence to take your place in the long red line. You are a Spartan, and you realize that your hunger was the foundation of your immortality. You close your eyes for a second, feeling the pulse of the city around you, and prepare to march into the history books with the same empty gut as the kings who came before you. The dust of the training fields eventually settles, but the body never truly forgets the Agoge. As you move into your 30s and 40s, the long-term scars of your childhood starvation rituals begin to manifest in both your physical frame and your psychological landscape. This is the stage where the miracle of Spartan discipline meets the reality of human biology. You are a man of middle age in a city that prizes youth for its vigor and age for its wisdom, yet your transition between the two is marked by the permanent toll of a life defined by the absence of comfort. Your bones are dense, your skin is like parchment, and your metabolism, once a high-performance engine, has settled into a state of permanent, starved alertness. This is a mainstream historical fact that often goes unmentioned in the heroic poems. The Spartan lifestyle led to significant physical wear and tear. While the Agoge created the world's finest soldiers, it also produced men who carried the marks of chronic malnutrition and repetitive physical trauma. Historians still argue whether the legendary Spartan posture, that rigid, upright stance, was a sign of pride or a physiological adaptation to spinal stresses and early-onset joint issues caused by sleeping on reeds and marching barefoot. For you, the scars are both literal and metaphorical. You have the white lines of the altar whips on your back, and you have the hollow look in your eyes that never quite leaves a man who has spent 10 years wondering where his next meal is coming from. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about the aging Spartan. It was noted by some ancient observers that Spartans seemed to age all at once. Because they had no body fat to cushion the effects of time, they went from looking like bronzed gods to looking like gnarled oak trees almost overnight. You might say that the Spartan retirement plan is just being allowed to eat a slightly larger portion of black soup while your knees make noises that sound like a shield wall breaking. It's the kind of golden years experience where the gold is actually iron, and your benefit package is just the permission to stop running up mountains in the middle of the night. You realize that your mother's training was a trade-off. She gave you a glorious youth at the expense of a comfortable old age. You find that your relationship with food has been permanently warped. Even now, as a man of status who could theoretically eat his fill, you find yourself unable to indulge. The psychological scars are deeper than the physical ones. You still eat quickly, eyes scanning the room, a reflex from the days when an elder might snatch your plate to test your temper. You find that you cannot sleep on a soft bed. The silence of a comfortable room feels like an ambush. You have been starved for war so effectively that you are no longer compatible with peace. You are a biological weapon that cannot be uncocked. There is a light joke to be made here. A Spartan's idea of a midlife crisis is unbuying a fast chariot. It's accidentally eating a second olive and feeling like a hedonistic failure for a week. Or perhaps that the only thing sagging on an old Spartan is his patience for anyone who was unraised on vinegar and reeds. You realize that the Agoge has pruned your soul so deeply that there is nothing left but the state. You don't have hobbies. You have drills. You don't have friends. You have shield brothers. You don't have a home. You have a city. The starvation rituals didn't just train youth, they replaced you. There is an open scholarly debate phrase regarding the long-term effects of the Spartan system. Historians still argue whether the intense physical and nutritional stress of the Agoge led to a demographic collapse by shortening the lifespans of the warrior caste, or if the Spartans simply lived in a state of functional trauma that masked their physical decline. Looking at your brothers in the mess hall, the answer is written in the deep lines around their mouths. You are all survivors of a process that was never meant to be healthy, it was meant to be effective. You are the living ruins of a dream of perfection. This period of your life is where you find a quiet, grim peace. You know that you are a relic of a dying breed. The world is changing. Gold is flowing into Greece, and other cities are starting to look at the Spartan way as an eccentricity rather than a threat. But you carry the scars as a badge of office. You are the evidence that a human being can be forged into something beyond the flesh. You remember your mother, now an old woman, but still as sharp as a spear point, looking at you with that same unblinking gaze. She doesn't need to ask if you are still hard. She can see it in the way you carry your scars. As you prepare for the evening drill, your joints aching in the cool Peloponnesian air, you realize that the starvation rituals gave you something that time cannot take away, a total independence from your own body. You are not a slave to your aches, just as you were not a slave to your hunger. You are a Spartan, and the long-term scars are the map of your journey through the void. You pick up your shield, the bronze heavy and familiar, and step back into the line. You are ready to endure until the very end, because you have been enduring since the very beginning. The sun is finally beginning to dip below the crags of Mount Taygetus, casting a long violet shadow over the city of your birth. You are standing on the edge of the training grounds, watching a new herd of 7-year-olds being led away from their mothers. You see the confusion in their eyes, the shivering of their small frames in the pre-dawn chill, and for a fleeting second, you feel the ghost of your own childhood hunger stir in your gut. But then, you feel the weight of your own bronze shield, the steady rhythm of your heart, and the absolute clarity that comes from a life without clutter. This is the final silence. You have reached the end of the Agoge, the end of the campaigns, and the end of the constant driving need to prove your worth to the state. You are a Spartan, and you realize that your hunger was never about food. It was the foundation of your freedom. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Spartans believed that by being the most enslaved to their laws and their discipline, they were the freest people in Greece. They weren't slaves to their bellies, to their fears, or to the whims of a tyrant. Historians still argue whether this freedom through deprivation was a genuine philosophical achievement or a collective delusion that eventually led to the city's stagnation. To you, leaning against a sun-warmed stone wall, the debate feels like the buzzing of distant flies. You look at your hands, scarred and steady, and you know the truth. You are free from the noise of the world. You have lived in the void for so long that you have become the master of it. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the final silence of a Spartan's life. It was said that the only time a Spartan's name was carved into a gravestone was if they died in battle or for women in childbirth. To live a long, quiet life was to be forgotten by history. You might say that the Spartan LinkedIn profile is just an empty stone until you do something spectacular enough to earn a chisel. It's the kind of legacy planning where the retirement fund is just the hope that your death will be as disciplined as your life. You realize that your mother's final lesson to you wasn't about the shield, but about the silence. She taught you that the world doesn't need to know your name. It only needs to feel your impact. The hunger is still there, of course. It's a low, familiar hum, like the sound of the wind through the pines. But it no longer has teeth. You have befriended it. You realize that the starvation rituals were a way of clearing the room, removing the distractions of the flesh so that the spirit of the state could move in. You look at the younger boys, and you don't feel pity. You feel a stern, quiet hope. You know that they are being given the greatest gift a man can receive, the knowledge that he is enough, even when he has nothing. You are the final silence of the Agoge, quiet confidence of a man who has looked into the abyss of his own needs and didn't blink. As the light fades and the stars begin to prick the velvet sky over Laconia, the world seems to grow smaller, softer, and more focused. The frantic energy of the day dissolves into a rhythmic, cooling peace. You can feel the tension leaving your shoulders, that iron-tight preparedness finally relaxing into a state of pure, effortless presence. The images of the dusty plains, the bitter soup, and the sharp reeds begin to blur and soften at the edges, like charcoal sketches being swept away by a gentle tide. The air around you is perfectly still, carrying only the faint, sweet scent of mountain thyme and the distant, rhythmic chirping of the cicadas. Your breath slows, matching the deep, slow pulse of the earth beneath your feet. There is no more need for the theft, the lash, or the struggle. The fox has finally stopped gnawing, leaving behind a profound, hollow tranquility. You are safe. You are whole. You are part of the stone and the stars. Let the memory of the struggle drift away like smoke from a dying fire, leaving only the warmth and the silence. The world is at rest, and you, the warrior of the void, have finally found your peace. Sleep now, for the watch is over, and the city is safe in the shadows of the hills.